The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which was the same day Harlan Voss decided to ruin a woman he had never met. He sat behind his desk at the Blackridge Land and Cattle Association, a title he had invented himself, printed on cards he handed out like they meant something, and he held the envelope up to the light the way a man holds a bad poker hand, squinting, calculating. Then he set it down, picked up his pen, and wrote a single line on a piece of his own stationery, folded it twice, and handed it to the boy who stood by the door. "Make sure that gets to the train station before she does," he said. The boy asked no questions. That was the only kind of help Harlan Voss kept around him. What was in that letter would have sent Amelia Hart back east before her boots ever touched Montana soil. It would have ended an arrangement she had traveled 4 days by rail to honor. It would have kept Wyatt Callahan exactly where Harlan needed him, alone, overextended, and one bad winter away from selling. But the boy's horse threw a shoe 2 miles outside of town, and the letter never arrived. If you're watching this right now and you've ever had someone try to take something from you before you even had a chance to fight for it, this story is for you. Stay until the end. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss what happens next. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The train from Billings arrived 40 minutes late, which suited Wyatt Callahan just fine. He had not wanted to come into town at all. He stood at the far end of the platform with his hat pulled low and his coat collar up against the January wind, and he watched the other men from the surrounding ranches greet their wives, their brothers, their freight deliveries. He watched all of it with the particular expression of a man who has spent so many years managing other people's needs that he has forgotten what it feels like to have one of his own. He was 41 years old. He had 12,000 acres of grazing land, 400 head of cattle, and 11 men in his employ. He had a house with 6 rooms, a barn that was better insulated than most homes in Blackridge, and a reputation for being the kind of man you did not argue with twice. What he did not have was anyone waiting for him at the end of the day. He had not intended to fix that. He had managed 8 years without anyone at the house, and he told himself, told anyone who asked, which wasn't many people, that he managed fine. The ranch ran. The cattle came through most winters. The men got paid. But the winter of 1887 had started mean and showed no sign of letting up, and his foreman, a wiry, practical man named Dale Gruber, had finally said the thing Wyatt had been refusing to hear for 3 years. "You need someone who can run the house side of this operation," Dale had said, standing in the barn doorway in November, not quite looking at Wyatt directly. "Winter's going to be bad. You'll need every man outside. Can't have half the crew inside making soup and patching socks." Wyatt had not answered right away. He had kept working the harness he was mending, and Dale had stood there because Dale was one of the few people who understood that silence from Wyatt Callahan was not a refusal. It was processing. 3 weeks later, Wyatt had written to the Western Horizons Marriage Agency in St. Louis. He had been specific in his letter. He was not looking for a romantic arrangement. He was looking for a capable woman, ideally one with some experience managing a household under difficult conditions, who understood that frontier life was not the adventure some women in Eastern magazines seemed to imagine it was. He offered a fair home, financial stability, and honest treatment. He did not offer warmth. He did not think he had much of it left. The agency had written back with a profile. Amelia Hart, 34, a widow from Philadelphia, former schoolteacher. Her husband had died of fever 2 years prior, no children. The letter described her as practical, hardworking, and accustomed to self-sufficiency. Wyatt had read it twice and written back. Acceptable. Send travel arrangements. That was the full extent of the courtship. Standing on the platform now, watching the train doors open, he was aware of a feeling he could not quite name. Not anticipation. Not exactly. More like the particular tension of a man who has agreed to something he can't entirely control and is already calculating the contingencies. The first passengers off were a family. Father, mother, 3 children, all holding on to each other in the cold. Then a cattle buyer Wyatt recognized from Billings. Then an older woman who was immediately collected by someone waiting with a wagon. Then the platform was quiet for a moment, and Wyatt thought maybe she had missed the train, or changed her mind, or he was honest enough with himself to admit this. Maybe he had misread the date. Then she stepped down. She was not what he had pictured. He wasn't sure what he had pictured exactly, but it wasn't this. A woman who carried her own bags without looking around for someone to take them, who planted her feet on the platform like she was testing whether the ground would hold, and who then looked up and directly across the crowd with a directness that was almost startling. She found him. He wasn't sure how. He was at the far end of the platform, deliberately positioned away from the crowd. But her eyes moved across the space with the methodical focus of someone who has learned that the fastest way through an unfamiliar place is to assess it quickly and move without hesitation. She walked toward him, did not wave, did not smile, just walked. Wyatt did not move either. When she was close enough that talking didn't require raising voices over the wind, she stopped and looked at him plainly and said, "You're Callahan." It wasn't a question. "You're Amelia Hart," he said. "I am." She set one of her bags down. Not because it was too heavy. She set it down the way a person sets something down when they're going to need their hand free. "The agency letter said you'd send someone to collect me. I assume that's you." "I came myself." She looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't read. Then she nodded, once. "All right," she said. "What's the situation at the ranch?" He blinked. He had expected. He didn't know what he had expected. Nervousness, maybe. Some version of the performance he associated with first meetings, where people said things they didn't mean and asked questions they didn't care about. "Situation?" he said. "Your letter to the agency mentioned a difficult winter season. I want to know what I'm walking into. What's the state of the house? What's the state of the livestock? And how many men are you running?" Wyatt stared at her for just a second longer than was natural. Then something in his face shifted. Not quite a smile, but a loosening of whatever was permanently braced there. 11 men, he said. "The house is functional but not well managed. The livestock is my priority, and it's holding, but we're watching 2 horses that may not make it through January. The kitchen hasn't been properly organized since my last cook left in October." Amelia picked her bag back up. "Then we should get moving," she said. "It'll be dark in 3 hours, and I'd like to see what I'm dealing with before then." They walked to his wagon without another word. That was the beginning. Dale Gruber was waiting at the ranch entrance when Wyatt's wagon came down the road, which meant Dale had been watching from the ridge, a habit he had developed after the incident 3 years ago when a stranger had ridden onto the property and gotten within 50 yards of the barn before anyone noticed. Dale watched everything. He just did it quietly. He looked at the woman on the wagon seat beside Wyatt, and he looked at the set of Wyatt's shoulders, and he felt something in the back of his chest relax slightly. The particular relaxation of a man who has been worried about something for a long time and has finally seen the first sign that it might be addressed. He pulled his hat off when the wagon stopped. "Ma'am," he said. "Dale Gruber?" Amelia said. He glanced at Wyatt. Wyatt's expression gave nothing away. "Yes, ma'am." "The foreman." "Good." She climbed down from the wagon herself, not waiting. "I'll want to talk to you this evening about the crew schedule and what the house has been pulling from the supply stores. But first, show me the kitchen." Dale put his hat back on. He had the look of a man recalibrating. "Yes, ma'am," he said again, and led the way. Well, the kitchen was, in Amelia's private assessment, a testament to how capable men can be at surviving and how poorly they can manage anything beyond that. There were provisions. Wyatt had not been wrong about that. The stores were reasonably stocked. But they were stacked without logic, with no inventory system, no rotation, and 3 separate sacks of cornmeal opened and left to harden because no one had thought to use them in order. There was a meat hook near the window that had been repaired with a length of wire that was already starting to rust. The wood stove was functional, but had not been properly cleaned, and she could tell from the smell that it had been throwing smoke back into the room on bad wind days. She stood in the middle of it with her coat still on and made a list in her head. She had learned in the 2 years since Thomas died, and she had been managing everything alone, that the fastest way to feel like you could not handle a situation was to look at the whole of it at once. The second fastest was to start without a list. She started with the wood stove. She did not ask for help. She simply located the cleaning tools, which had been pushed to the back of a shelf behind a box of spare lamp wicks, and began. One of the ranch hands, a young man named Percy with sun-reddened ears and an expression of habitual bewilderment, came to the kitchen doorway twice in the first hour. The first time he seemed to be considering offering assistance. The second time he seemed to be reconsidering whether to ask what she was doing. Both times he left without saying anything. Wyatt came in just before supper. He stood in the doorway and looked at the stove, which was now clean and drawing properly, and at the supply shelves, which had been reorganized by type and date, and at the pot on the burner that was producing a smell that had not been in this kitchen for years. He said nothing for a long moment. "You didn't have to do all of this tonight," he finally said. "I know," Amelia said without turning from the stove, "but I would have thought about it all night if I didn't." He didn't have an answer for that. He understood it better than she probably expected. "Supper in 30 minutes, she said. "I'd like everyone to eat at the same time. Is that possible?" Wyatt considered it. The men usually ate in shifts, which he had allowed because it required less coordination. "I'll arrange it," he said. She nodded. He left. He came back 28 minutes later with 11 men who were clean-handed and slightly uncertain, arranged around a table that had been set properly for the first time in longer than any of them could clearly remember. The meal itself was not extraordinary. A thick stew made from what she had found in the stores, bread from a recipe she had memorized because she had been making it since she was 12 years old, and coffee that was strong enough to insult the weaker among them. But the men were quiet in a particular way. Not the quiet of discomfort, the quiet of something like attention. After supper, when the plates had been cleared, she cleared them herself, because she needed to see what the men had eaten and what they had not, which told her things about what they were used to and what their bodies needed. She sat down at the table with Dale Gruber and the supply ledger and started asking questions. Wyatt sat at the far end of the table, not quite part of the conversation, not quite removed from it. He drank his coffee and watched. She asked about the supply rotation schedule. Dale told her there wasn't one. She asked about the horse feed allocation for the two animals that were struggling. Dale described the current approach, and she asked 3 follow-up questions that suggested, gently, that the approach had a specific problem. Dale listened without defensiveness, which told Wyatt something about how she had framed the questions. She was not telling him he was wrong. She was trying to understand what he knew, and building the correction out of that knowledge rather than over it. Wyatt had managed men for 20 years, and he did not always do that himself. By 9 o'clock, she had a revised supply schedule, a new rotation for the horses, and a list of 6 specific repairs to the house interior that she intended to complete within the week. She had also, without particularly trying to, learned the name and a key personal detail of every man at that table. She excused herself at 9:15 and went to the room Dale had prepared for her. The room at the back of the house, near the kitchen, that had apparently been used for storage since the last person to sleep in it had been Wyatt's late wife, Claire. She lay on the bed in her clothes for a while, looking at the ceiling, and she let herself feel what she had been holding back since the train platform. She was terrified. Not of the work, not of the cold, not even of the man who had barely spoken 20 words to her since she arrived. She was terrified that she would come to need this place, that she would let herself start to belong here, the way she had let herself belong in the school in Philadelphia and in the house in that quiet street where she and Thomas had lived their careful, small life. She had let herself belong in those places, and then both of them had been taken from her. The house when the debts came due after Thomas died. The school when the new headmaster decided married teachers who became widows were liabilities rather than assets. She had gotten very good at surviving. She was not sure she had gotten good at anything else. She listened to the wind against the window and told herself, "Be useful, don't be necessary. Those are not the same thing." Then she put her hand over her eyes and went to sleep before she could argue with herself about it. 3 days passed before Harlan Voss came to the ranch. In those 3 days, Amelia had fixed the smoke problem with the kitchen stove, reorganized the supply stores completely, sent a list of needed items to town with Dale, retrained the system the men used for tracking how much firewood was brought in daily versus burned, and without announcing it, identified which of the 11 hands was skimming a small but consistent amount from the feed supply records. She had not said anything yet. She was watching. Wyatt noticed she was watching. He noticed most things about her, which annoyed him in a low, persistent way he did not examine closely. Harlan Voss arrived on a Thursday morning in a coat that was too expensive for honest frontier work and a buggy that showed no signs of having spent a winter in this county. He came with a friendly smile and a handshake that lasted slightly too long, and he brought a bottle of bourbon that he presented with the particular generosity of a man who wants something. Wyatt had known Harlan Voss for 6 years. He did not like him. This was not an assessment that had changed over time. It was a first impression that 6 years of observation had done nothing to revise. Harlan was the kind of man who was never quite dishonest enough to confront directly and never quite honest enough to trust. He ran a land brokerage that operated in the spaces between what the county could track, and he had the lawyer's gift of making every proposal sound like a favor he was doing for you. He had been trying to buy Callahan land for 3 years. Wyatt had refused every time, without particular drama. Harlan kept coming back with new framings of the same question. That morning, though, his eyes went immediately to Amelia, who was carrying a crate of kitchen supplies from the wagon that Dale had just brought back from town. Something changed in Harlan's expression. Wyatt watched it happen and couldn't name it exactly, but it registered in the same part of his brain that registered sounds that didn't fit the normal sounds of the ranch. The wrong note in the nighttime quiet that meant something was off. "Didn't realize you'd taken on additional household staff," Harlan said, keeping his voice conversational. "This is my wife," Wyatt said. The word came out without his having decided to say it that way. My wife. Like he'd been saying it for years. Harlan's smile stayed exactly the same, which was itself a tell. A genuine reaction would have changed it slightly. "Congratulations," Harlan said. "When did this happen?" "Recently," Wyatt said. Amelia had set her crate down on the porch railing and was looking at the two of them with the expression she had been wearing when she stepped off the train. Measuring, patient, precise. "Mr. Voss," she said. It wasn't a question or a greeting, just an acknowledgement, slightly flat, the way you'd read a name off a document. Harlan turned his smile on her. "Mrs. Callahan." Amelia picked up her crate and went inside. Harlan watched her go. Then he turned back to Wyatt, and something in the friendliness around his eyes cooled by a fraction of a degree, the way water changes character just before it freezes. "She seems capable," he said. "She is," Wyatt said. "Interesting timing," Harlan said. "I had heard, well, you know how talk travels. I had heard the agency situation might have had some complications." Wyatt looked at him, steady. "What kind of complications?" "Oh, you know. Administrative things, mix-ups." Harlan waved a hand. "These agencies can be careless. I imagine it's all sorted out." It was not a question. It was a statement designed to open a door. Wyatt did not walk through it. "Come inside," he said. "I'll hear what you came to say." What Harlan came to say was, as always, a version of the same thing. The county was dealing with pressure from Eastern investment interests. Certain land parcels in the north corridor of Wyatt's range were being looked at for a rail expansion that might cause legal complications. It would be in everyone's best interest if some arrangement could be made before the county got officially involved. Wyatt had heard this argument before in slightly different clothing. The rail expansion rumor had been circulating for 2 years and had not yet produced a single surveyor or official document, which told him something about how real it was. He said, "When the county shows me official paperwork, I'll consider my options. Until then, my land is my land." Harlan left with his bourbon, which Wyatt had not opened. Amelia was in the kitchen when Wyatt came back through. She did not ask about the meeting. She asked him whether he wanted coffee. He sat down at the table and said, without quite meaning to, "Do you know who that was?" She poured 2 cups, set one in front of him. "Harlan Voss," she said. "He runs some kind of land arrangement business. Dale mentioned him the first night, said he'd been making offers on surrounding properties for the better part of 3 years. Wyatt looked at his coffee. "Dale mentioned that." "Dale talks when he's comfortable," she said. "He's been comfortable since about the second morning." Wyatt had not known that. Not exactly. He had noticed Dale seemed more settled since Amelia arrived, but he had attributed it to the organizational improvements, the supply schedule. He had not considered that Dale might simply feel like there was finally someone else in the house who was paying attention. "Voss mentioned complications with the agency," Wyatt said. Amelia sat down across from him. Her coffee was between both hands. She looked at him directly, which she always did. She had the unsettling habit of making eye contact the way people usually only did when they were about to say something serious. "I received a letter," she said, "the morning I left Philadelphia. It was from a man who didn't give a name. Just said that the Callahan arrangement had been canceled due to a property dispute and that I should contact the agency for reassignment." Wyatt was very still. "I thought it was a clerical error," she said. The agency confirmed my arrangements directly and had not informed me of any cancellation. So I came anyway. The room was quiet for a moment. You thought it was an error, Wyatt said. I didn't know what it was, she said. But I know what a letter like that does, if a woman believes it. It sends her back, or it sends her to a different arrangement. She took a sip of her coffee. I don't go backward easily. Wyatt looked at her for a long moment. The fire in the stove made the only sound in the room. That letter was not a clerical error, he said. No, she said. I didn't think it was. And you came anyway. I came anyway? He stood up. He was not sure why. Some instinct that sitting still was wrong for what he was feeling, which was a complicated, layered thing he had no language for. He walked to the window. The ranch was out there, gray and cold and his. 12,000 acres of everything he'd built since he was 23 years old and came west with $100 and a bad plan that turned out to work. Someone wanted you not to arrive, he said. Yes, she said. Someone wanted me to keep being without a household, he said. She was quiet for a moment, then, someone wanted you to be vulnerable. He turned from the window. She was still at the table with her coffee, looking at him with that plain, direct look. Do you know who? He said. I have a suspicion, she said, but I'd rather not say it until I know more. He would not have accepted that from one of his men. He would have pushed, demanded the answer, made clear that on his ranch people did not hold suspicions close when he needed information. He did not push. He wasn't entirely sure why, except that there was something in her voice, not caution, not deception. More like the steadiness of someone who has learned the hard way that naming things too soon has costs. Fine, he said, but when you know more, I want to know it. Yes, she said. That seems fair. He went back to work. She watched him go, and then she sat for another few minutes with her coffee, looking at nothing in particular, turning over in her mind the things she had not said. That she knew the letter from Philadelphia had not come from the agency, and she knew it had been written by someone local because the wording had used a specific description of the Callahan land parcels, the North Corridor, the winter grazing territory, that a stranger from St. Louis would not have known. Whoever had tried to stop her from arriving knew Wyatt Callahan's ranch, knew its value, and wanted it. She was not afraid of that exactly. She was careful about it, which was different. The following week was the first real test. Two of Wyatt's men got into a dispute over a split in the work assignments. A minor thing, the kind of conflict that exists in every crew and gets managed quickly if there's any structure to absorb it. But in the Callahan Ranch for the past 8 years, there had been no structure except Wyatt himself, which meant every minor conflict required Wyatt's intervention, which meant Wyatt was perpetually pulled from the work only he could do to manage problems that did not require his particular skills. This time, the two men, Percy, who was young and easily wounded, and an older hand named Stinson, who had been at the ranch for 4 years and ran on pride the way a steam engine ran on coal, brought their dispute to the dinner table, which was the worst possible location for it because everyone could hear and everyone had opinions. Amelia had been back in the pantry when it started. She came out without hurrying and stood at the edge of the table and listened for approximately 45 seconds. Then she said, Percy, when was the last time you took the northern fence line by yourself? Percy blinked. Last week. And you completed it? Yes, ma'am. Without Stinson helping? Yes, but... And Stinson, the hay calculation discrepancy. That's yours to sort out, or does it need Wyatt? Stinson set his jaw. Mine. Good. She went back into the pantry. The two men looked at each other. Whatever the dispute had been about, rank, assignment, the particular kind of masculine arithmetic about who was doing more, it had been addressed without being addressed, which was the only way to address it without making it worse. Dale Gruber, from his seat at the corner, looked at the pantry door. Wyatt, from the table, looked at the pantry door. Percy looked at his supper and started eating. Stinson, after a moment, did the same. That was the end of it. Later, when the men had cleared out and Amelia was washing dishes, Wyatt came into the kitchen and stood for a moment, not quite saying anything. You could have let me handle that, he said finally. You were mending harness, she said. You didn't need to stop. That's my crew. I know. She rinsed a cup. I wasn't overstepping. I was managing the temperature before it got hot enough to need you. He thought about that. If you do that without telling me, I don't know what's happening. She stopped washing, turned slightly to look at him. You're right, she said. I'll tell you. He hadn't expected that either. He'd expected a defense or an apology. She gave him neither, just a clean acknowledgement that she'd been off by one step and was willing to correct it. He nodded, left. She turned back to the dishes and let out a breath she had been holding. This was not going to be simple. She had known that. But simple was not the thing she had come west for. She had come west because simple had stopped being available to her. And because, though she would not have admitted it to anyone, including herself, for a very long time, she had read Wyatt Callahan's letter to the agency 3 times. Not looking for something wrong. Looking at the particular bluntness of it, the way a man who has learned to expect disappointment still sits down and writes what he needs honestly, without dressing it up. She had thought, that is someone who is still trying. She had not been sure she was still trying. She was finding out. Whoa. On the 9th evening, she found the discrepancies she had been watching for. In the feed records, across a span of 11 weeks, there were small adjustments, a pound here, a pound there, that did not correspond to any change in the livestock count. They were small enough to miss. They had been small enough to miss for 11 weeks. She sat at the kitchen table with the ledger and made a separate sheet of calculations and looked at what added up. Then she sat for a while and thought about what to do. She could bring it to Wyatt directly. That was the obvious move. But she needed to know whether this was a man acting on his own or whether someone had arranged it, whether the hand-skimming feed supplies was doing it for himself or for someone who had asked him to. Because there was a difference between a hungry man stealing small things to survive and a spy in the house. She thought about the letter she had almost believed in Philadelphia. She thought about Harlan Voss and his too expensive coat and the particular way his eyes had gone cold when she walked past him without smiling. She put the ledger away. She would know more in a few days. She was patient. She had been patient for 2 years through things that made a feed record discrepancy look like a simple math problem. She put out the kitchen lamp and went to bed. Outside, the wind was picking up from the north. The worst of the winter was still coming. And something else was coming too, something that none of them could see yet. Not Wyatt, not Dale, not Harlan Voss in his warm office in town. Something that would change everything before spring arrived. The feed ledger was still on the kitchen table when Amelia woke the next morning, and she left it there on purpose. She had learned in the 2 years since Thomas died and she had been managing things alone that the worst thing you could do with a problem was hide it before you understood it. Hiding a problem was not the same as solving it. It just moved the problem somewhere darker, where it kept growing without light. She made coffee. She made biscuits from the last of the good flour. She had already written flour on the supply list twice, underlining it once. She put the biscuits in the oven and sat back down with the ledger and her coffee and looked at the numbers again in the early gray light that came through the kitchen window. 11 weeks. 43 separate adjustments, each one small enough to be an honest mistake, all of them trending in the same direction. The man she suspected was named Cord. He was 32, had been at the ranch for 7 months, and had the particular quality of someone who was very careful to be unremarkable. He showed up on time, did his work without complaint, and never offered more than he was asked. In Amelia's experience, that kind of careful invisibility was either the habit of someone who had been punished for standing out, or the habit of someone who did not want to be looked at closely. She had not decided yet which kind Cord was. That mattered. She heard boots on the porch before the men came in for breakfast, the particular shuffle and stomp of men knocking mud off in the cold, and she closed the ledger and moved it to the shelf without hurrying. Percy came through the door first, the way he usually did, because he was perpetually slightly ahead of wherever he was supposed to be. He nodded at her. She handed him a mug without asking, and he took it with both hands and stood near the stove the way all of them did in the mornings. Not blocking it, just close enough to feel it. Cord came in fourth. He did not look at the shelf. Most people would have. It was a natural instinct. When something has been on a surface and then removed, the eye goes to where it was. She had left the ledger there for 3 days running, and she had watched everyone's eyes as they came through the kitchen. Most of the men glanced at it the first morning without thinking, the way you glance at anything unfamiliar. After that, they stopped noticing it. Cord had never once glanced at it. That told her what she needed to know about what he knew. Wyatt came in last, which was his pattern. He ate with the men, but he came in last, not because of any particular custom, but because he was always finishing something. There was always one more thing. She had started leaving his coffee in the pot rather than a cup, because a cup went cold waiting for him. He sat down across from Dale and ate without ceremony. He ate fast, she had noticed. Not hungrily, just efficiently, the way men eat when they have learned that a meal is fuel and not something to linger over. She had started putting a second biscuit on his plate without being asked, and he had not commented on it, but he ate both of them every morning, which was its own kind of comment. After breakfast, when the men cleared out for the day's work, she caught Wyatt before he followed. "I need 10 minutes, she said. He stopped. He was already thinking about something outside. She could see it in the direction of his attention, already ahead of himself. But he pulled it back. Now? Now is better than later. He sat back down, poured himself the last of the coffee, which she had been keeping warm. She sat across from him and did not drag it out. "One of your men has been adjusting the feed records," she said. "Small amounts over 11 weeks, 43 entries. It adds up to approximately 200 pounds of oat feed." Wyatt's face did not change exactly, but something tightened behind the eyes. "Which man?" "Cord." A pause. "You're certain?" "I'm not guessing," she said, "but I don't know yet whether he's doing it for himself or on someone's instruction. That's the part I need to know before you do anything about it." Wyatt was quiet for a moment. The wind was going against the east wall. She could hear it from the kitchen. "If he's doing it for himself," Wyatt said, "he's fired and gone." "Yes." "If someone's paying him to do it, then firing him doesn't solve the problem," she said. "It just tells the problem that you're watching." He looked at her across the table. There was something in the look that was not quite the way he usually looked at her. Not the assessing, managed distance he kept between himself and most things. Something more like the way you look at someone when you realize they have been thinking 3 steps further than you, and you're not sure whether to be relieved or unsettled. "How much time do you need?" he said. 2 days? She said. "Maybe 3. You're not going to tell me what you're planning." "I'm going to watch who he talks to when he goes into town on Saturday," she said. "That's all. Dale told me he goes in every Saturday. I'll go in for supplies. It won't look like anything." "You'll go alone?" "I'll take Percy," she said. "He talks enough that nobody watches what I'm doing." Wyatt picked up his coffee cup, set it back down. There was a quality to the silence that she had come to recognize. Not agreement exactly, but the particular restraint of a man who has decided not to argue with a plan he can't find a flaw in. "Fine," he said, "but if Cord does anything that puts the ranch at risk before Saturday, I'm not waiting." "That's fair," she said. He stood up, went to the door, then stopped, which was not his usual pattern. He usually left without hesitation. "The letter you got in Philadelphia," he said, not turning. "How long have you thought it was Voss?" She did not ask how he'd arrived at Voss. She had not said the name, but she was not surprised he'd gotten there. "Since the first morning," she said. When Dale mentioned the North Corridor, the letter used that exact phrase. Wyatt was still for a moment. Then he went out. She refilled her own coffee and sat with it for a while, listening to the ranch come alive outside, the sounds of men and animals and cold air and work. And she let herself feel, briefly, the particular sensation of being somewhere she was useful, not needed. She had kept that distinction carefully in her mind since the first night. Useful was something you chose. Needed was something that could trap you. She was still deciding which this was. Saturday arrived with a gray sky and a temperature that had dropped another 6 degrees overnight, and Percy was at the wagon before she was, which she appreciated because it meant she did not have to spend 10 minutes persuading him that she wanted company and not an escort. He talked the entire road into Blackridge. She let him. Percy had the gift of filling silence without requiring participation. He narrated the landscape, mentioned a horse he had owned as a boy, asked her one question about Philadelphia, and then answered it himself with an imagined version of Philadelphia that had very little to do with the real place but was vivid enough that she did not correct him. She was watching the road behind them and the road ahead, and by the time they reached Blackridge, she had established that no one had followed them out of the ranch. The town was small enough that its Saturday activity was visible all at once from the main street, the feed store, the dry goods, the saloon at the far end that was already doing business at 10 in the morning. The land broker's office was on the corner of the main street and the cross street, a low-slung building with newer paint than everything around it, which told you something about where the money was in Blackridge. She sent Percy to the dry goods with a list and a clear instruction: take his time. Then she went to the feed store. It was a legitimate errand. She needed to confirm pricing on the replacement oat feed and check availability on a specific variety of hay. She'd found a reference to in an agricultural pamphlet she'd discovered in the back of one of the kitchen drawers. The errand would take 20 minutes if she let it, which was long enough to position herself near the window that faced the main street. Cord arrived in town at 11:15. She watched him tie his horse and walk, not to the saloon where most of the ranch hands went on their days off, but directly to the land broker's office on the corner. He was inside for 7 minutes. When he came out, he did not go to the saloon. He went straight back to his horse. She had what she needed. She finished her conversation with the feed store clerk, bought what she had come to buy, and walked back to find Percy, who had not yet finished the dry goods list and was in the middle of a detailed conversation with the store owner about a coyote problem on the eastern range that had nothing to do with anything Amelia had asked him to buy. "Percy," she said, and gave him a look. And he bought the last 3 things on the list in under 2 minutes. On the road back, she was quieter than usual, and Percy, to his credit, noticed this and did not fill the silence for the first 10 minutes, which was probably the longest he had gone without speaking since she had known him. Then he said, "You see something in town?" She looked at him. He was younger than she usually gave him credit for being, 23 maybe, with that particular combination of alertness and uncertainty that meant he was smart enough to notice things and not yet sure what to do with them. "Why do you ask?" she said. "You've got that look," he said, "the one you get when you're adding things up." She looked back at the road. "Keep what you notice to yourself," she said. "For now." He nodded once. He did not ask again. That was the moment she decided Percy was more than he appeared to be. Most young men would have pushed, asked what she saw, offered a theory, tried to be useful in the showy way that young men sometimes confused with actual usefulness. Percy just accepted the instruction and drove. She would remember that later. She told Wyatt that evening after supper, when the men had gone to the bunkhouse and Dale had taken himself to bed, with the particular efficiency of a man who values sleep above almost everything else. She laid it out plainly. Cord went directly to Voss's office. 7 minutes. Went straight back to his horse after. Did not use the visit as cover for anything social. Wyatt sat across from her and listened without interrupting, which she appreciated. He was very good at listening when he thought the information mattered. 7 minutes is long enough to report and get instructions, he said. Or long enough to pass something along, she said. Documents, records, something he copied from the property files. Wyatt's jaw tightened. I don't keep property files in a place Cord would have access to. The supply records reference the North Corridor pasture acreage in 3 places, she said. Whoever organized the original ledger format was not thinking about what information was encoded in the way the supply allocations were divided. Wyatt looked at her. Your land, she said carefully, is described in those records by pasture section. Anyone who understood how to read supply allocation against pasture section could reconstruct an informal map of how your land is divided and what its most productive areas are. The silence that followed was not the usual kind. It had a texture to it, the texture of a man realizing that a vulnerability he didn't know he had has been sitting open for an unknown amount of time. How long has Cord been doing this? He said. 7 months, she said. That's when he started. He was hired 8 months ago. He spent 1 month learning the system, she said. Then he started. Wyatt stood up. She had learned that he stood up when he needed to think in a way that sitting didn't allow. There was something about the movement, about being upright, that was part of how his mind worked. She let him stand. He walked to the window. Outside was dark and cold, and the wind had picked up again from the north. The cattle would be against the windbreak tonight, and 2 of the older horses would need extra attention, and there was a section of the east fence that Dale had flagged as weakening. All of the ordinary pressures of the ranch operating simultaneously with the pressure of this, which was not ordinary at all. If I fire him now, Wyatt said, Voss knows we found him. Yes. If I keep him on, he keeps reporting. Unless what he reports becomes what we choose to send, she said. Wyatt turned from the window. He looked at her with the particular attention of someone hearing something they had not fully expected. You want to use him, he said. I want to have the option, she said. Before we decide, I want to know what Voss is actually planning, because firing one man doesn't stop a plan. It just makes the plan go around us." Wyatt leaned against the wall near the window and crossed his arms. It was a posture she had come to recognize as his thinking position. Arms crossed, not defensively, but as a kind of anchor, holding himself in place while his mind moved. "What do you need to know what Voss is planning?" he said. "I need to see what he filed with the county in the last 6 months," she said. "Land claim filings, brokerage agreements, anything that touches the North Corridor. Those are public records." "They're in the county office in Helena," she said, "which is 2 days' ride." "Dale can go," Wyatt said immediately. "Dale is too recognizable," she said. "He's been into that office with you 3 times on your own land matters. If he shows up asking about Voss's filings, someone will mention it." Wyatt was quiet. "Percy," she said. Wyatt looked at her. "Percy. He's young. Nobody knows him in Helena. I'll write down exactly what to look for and how to ask for it." She paused. "And I think he can be trusted to go and come back without doing anything that draws attention." "You've been watching him," Wyatt said. "I watch everyone," she said. "That's not the same as suspicion. I watched you." He blinked. It was a small thing, barely visible, but she caught it. "What did you decide?" he said. His voice was even, but there was something underneath the evenness that she was careful not to read too much into. "That you are exactly what you said you were in your letter," she said, "which is rarer than it should be." The fire settled in the stove. A log shifted and sent a brief shower of sparks against the grate. Outside, the wind set its cold peace against the walls of the house. "I'll talk to Percy," Wyatt said. "In the morning," she said. "Don't make it seem like it came from me." He looked at her again with that look she couldn't fully classify. "Why?" "Because he needs to feel like it's your trust," she said. "Not mine. He's been here 3 years. That matters to him." She stood up and began moving the cups to the basin. "I'm still new. I can give him a task, but I can't give him what you can." She heard him shift his weight, the small sound of a man standing up straighter than he'd been standing. "You do that," he said. "Notice what people need." She kept her back to him. Her hands were in the basin. "I do," she said. "It's not always comfortable knowing." He did not answer that. After a moment, she heard him go to the door and pull his coat off the hook. "Get some sleep," he said. "Weather's supposed to come in hard this week." She dried her hands. "I know," she said. "I've been watching the sky." The door opened and closed. The cold came in briefly, and then the room reasserted itself. Warm, lit, the smell of coffee and wood smoke, and the particular domestic smell of a house that has been inhabited again after a long absence. She stood at the basin for a moment with the dish towel in her hands, not moving. She was thinking about what she'd said, "You are exactly what you said you were in your letter," and wondering whether she'd meant it as a simple observation or whether something underneath the observation had made her say it out loud when she had not particularly planned to. She folded the dish towel and hung it and went to her room. Percy left for Helena on Monday morning before the rest of the crew was fully awake, with a saddlebag, a written list of instructions from Amelia, and the particular expression of someone who has been given a real task for the first time and is not entirely sure whether to be excited or terrified. She suspected both, which was the right state of mind for the job. The days while he was gone were not quiet. Weather was coming. She could feel it the way she had felt it in Philadelphia before the hard winters there. A particular quality to the air that was not cold exactly, but was a threshold, the feeling of standing on the near side of something large. The men felt it too. There was more work being done in the mornings, and done faster, with less of the usual banter. Windbreaks were reinforced, the cattle were moved. The horses that had been struggling were moved to the inner barn stall, where the heat from the other animals would help them. She worked alongside all of it, not outside with the cattle. That was not where she was needed, and she knew it. But inside, preparing the house and supply stores for the possibility that the ranch might need to be self-sufficient for a week or more. She did a full inventory. She identified 6 areas where their stores were thinner than they should be for an extended storm period. She sent a list with Dale to town on Tuesday, urgent flagged items at the top. Wyatt checked in with her twice on Tuesday and 3 times on Wednesday, which was more than usual. She did not comment on the frequency. On the third day, he came into the kitchen at mid-morning and stood near the table and said, "Stinson thinks the storm will hit Thursday." "I think Wednesday night," she said. He considered this. Stinson has been reading weather in Montana for 12 years. "I know," she said. "I've been watching the eastern sky since Sunday. It's moving faster than he thinks." Wyatt looked at her steadily. "What do you need?" "Another 2 hours today on the supply preparation," she said. "And someone should check the north barn roof," said. "I heard it working in last night's wind in a way it shouldn't." He sent 2 men to the north barn within the hour. She finished the supply preparation in an hour and 40 minutes. On Wednesday evening, just after dark, the snow began. By the time Percy rode back into the ranch on Thursday afternoon, through what had become a serious and sustained storm, his horse white with ice along its shoulders, his face red and set with the cold, Amelia had been awake for 30 hours. She had the barn door open before he reached it. "Get inside," she said. "Horse first, then you." He dismounted stiffly and led the animal in without argument, which told her how tired he was. He unsaddled the horse with automatic hands while she checked the animal's condition, legs, hooves, the look in its eyes, and found it tired but not injured. "Did you get what I asked for?" she said. Percy reached into the inside pocket of his coat and produced a folded set of papers. "Took 2 trips to the records room," he said. "The clerk was not friendly." "But you got them." "I said I was doing research for a property inheritance dispute on behalf of a deceased uncle." He looked at her with the mild pride of someone who has improvised successfully. She was more interested after that. She took the papers and looked at them right there in the barn doorway with the storm at her back. Her eyes moved fast. She had been a teacher and a widow and a woman managing her own affairs for 2 years, and reading documents quickly was a skill she had developed out of necessity. 3 filings. 2 in the last 4 months. All referencing the north corridor of the Callahan land, not by that name, but by the county parcel designation that corresponded to it. The 3rd filing was the one that stopped her breath briefly. It was a preliminary claim filed 6 weeks ago, asserting that a section of the North Corridor had been historically used as a transit corridor for neighboring ranches, and that this established use created a legal easement that predated Callahan's ownership. If it held up, if Voss could establish the easement, he could force legal access through the North Corridor, which would make the land effectively unworkable as grazing territory, which would reduce its value, which would put Wyatt in a position where selling, at a lower price, was the most practical option. It was not a dramatic land grab. It was a slow one, patient, engineered to look like a legal dispute rather than a theft. She folded the papers. "You did well," she said to Percy. He straightened slightly, just enough to notice. "Go get warm," she said. "Don't talk about this." He went. She stood in the barn doorway with the papers in her hand and the storm moving over the ranch like something that had been waiting a long time to arrive. And she thought about Harlan Voss and his too expensive coat and his 7-minute meetings and the letter he had sent to Philadelphia to stop her from getting here. She thought about what it meant that he had tried to stop her before he even knew who she was. He had not been trying to stop Amelia Hart specifically. He had been trying to stop a capable woman from arriving at this ranch. He had understood, before she even stepped off the train, that Wyatt Callahan's greatest vulnerability was not his land or his cattle or his finances. It was that he was alone. And now he wasn't. She walked back to the house through the storm with the documents under her coat, and by the time she reached the porch, she had already decided what to tell Wyatt, and in what order, and what she was going to do about Harlan Voss before spring arrived. She was not going to wait for spring. Inside, the house was warm and lit, and from the main room she could hear Wyatt's voice, low, directed, giving instructions to someone. And the sound of it was so ordinary, so simply the sound of a man in his own house managing his own affairs on a bad weather night, that she stopped in the kitchen doorway for a moment before she went through. She was being careful with herself. She had told herself to be useful and not necessary, and she had meant it, and she still meant it. But the documents under her coat were evidence of something Wyatt Callahan did not yet know, and she was the one who had found them, and she was the one who was going to help him fight it. She went into the main room. Wyatt looked up from across the room, and she pulled the documents out from under her coat and held them up. His eyes went to them, then to her. "Percy's back," she said, "and we have a problem, but now we understand it." He crossed the room in 4 steps. Wyatt read the documents twice. He stood at the table with the papers flat in front of him, and he read them the first time fast, the way you read something when your mind is already running ahead of your eyes, already looking for the part that changes everything. Then he set them down and stood very still for a moment, and then he picked them up and read them again, slower. Amelia sat across from him. She did not fill the silence. She had learned that he needed room to process, that the worst thing you could do when Wyatt Callahan was thinking was to interrupt the thinking with words that required responses. The storm was loud against the walls. Someone had added wood to the fire in the main room, and the heat had finally reached the kitchen, which meant the house felt more like itself than it had all day. When he set the papers down the second time, he did not look angry. She had expected anger. What she saw instead was something more contained than that. The particular cold clarity of a man who has been playing a slow game without knowing it and has just been handed the rulebook. 6 weeks, he said. Filed 6 weeks ago, she said, and I knew nothing about it. The county isn't required to notify you until the claim advances to a formal dispute stage, she said. Voss knows the process. He filed it early enough to establish the record, but late enough that you wouldn't have had time to mount a challenge before winter closed off travel to Helena. Wyatt looked at her. You know land law. I know enough, she said. Thomas, my husband, had a property dispute the year before he died. I sat in on every meeting with the attorney. I wasn't supposed to, but the attorney was charging by the hour, and Thomas kept forgetting what had been said, so I went and remembered it for him. Something moved across Wyatt's face at that. She couldn't read all of it. The easement claim, he said. Is it valid? No, she said. But it doesn't have to be valid to be effective. If Voss can make it look plausible enough to tie the land up in a county dispute for 6 to 12 months, the legal costs alone become a pressure point. And if you're dealing with a hard winter on top of that... She stopped. He's betting on me being financially extended, Wyatt said flatly. He's been watching your operations for 3 years, she said. He knows your patterns. He knows when your cash is committed to cattle maintenance versus when it's available for legal fees. She paused. And he had someone inside who was telling him when that balance shifted. Wyatt's jaw set. Cord. Cord was reporting feed and supply costs, she said, which, if you understand ranch accounting, tells you a great deal about where the money is going. Wyatt pushed back from the table and stood up. He walked to the window, nothing but dark and snow out there, and stood with his hands at his sides, not crossed this time. Just at his sides, open. She had not seen that posture before. It looked like a man trying not to close into himself. I need an attorney, he said. You need a specific kind of attorney, she said, not someone from Blackridge. Someone who knows county filing procedures in Helena and has no existing relationship with Voss's operation. You have someone in mind. I have a name, she said, from the county records office. The filing clerk, not the unfriendly one, the other one, mentioned a woman named Ruth Calloway who handles land disputes for smaller ranchers in the western counties. Apparently she's handled 3 easement challenges in the last 2 years and won all 3. Wyatt turned from the window. You got that from the records clerk. Percy got the documents, she said. I wrote down what he told me to ask and what to listen for beyond the asking. The second part was mine. He looked at her for a long moment. The fire said its piece. The storm said its piece louder. All right, he said. Cord first, then the attorney. Cord can wait 2 more days, she said. He's not going anywhere in this storm, and whatever he's already reported, he's reported. 2 days won't change that. What changes if we move on him now is that Voss knows we've found the filing. Wyatt stared at her. If Voss thinks you haven't found the filing yet, she said, he'll hold his next move until spring, which gives us time to build a counterfiling in Helena before he expects it. If he finds out now that, he moves faster, Wyatt said. He accelerates everything, she said, including whatever else he has planned that we haven't found yet. The silence stretched. Outside, a gust hit the north wall hard enough that the lamp on the table flickered. You think there's more, he said. A man who files a preliminary easement claim, plants someone inside your crew, and tries to intercept your mail-order bride arrangement before she arrives, she said, is not a man with one plan. He is a man with a sequence. Wyatt was very still. We've found step 2, she said. I don't know what step 3 is. He sat back down. Not the controlled return of a man who has made a decision, but the slower descent of a man who has just understood the full weight of what he is carrying. He put his elbows on the table and pressed his hands flat against the surface, and she watched him breathe in and breathe out once, with the deliberateness of someone who does not let himself show that kind of thing very often. "I've been running this ranch for 18 years, he said. "I have never, not once, let someone operate this close to me without knowing it." "He was careful," she said. That's not an excuse." "No," she said. "It isn't, but it's a fact. And facts are more useful than blame right now." He looked up at her. There was something raw in it, briefly. The thing that lived underneath the control and the management and the 18 years of being the person everyone else depended on. Then it was gone, the way it always went with him, replaced by the steadiness that was either his greatest strength or his most practiced defense. She could not yet tell which. "What do you need from me?" he said. "I need you to behave exactly as you have been for the next 2 days, she said. "Treat Cord normally. Treat Voss, if he contacts you, normally. Don't let anything change that you would control in front of other people. And you." "I'm going to write a letter tonight," she said, "to Ruth Calloway in Helena. I need you to tell me everything you know about the North Corridor, the history of it, when you acquired it, who the neighboring landowners are, whether there's any record of it being used as a transit route before your time." He told her. It took 40 minutes and 3 cups of coffee, and twice she stopped him to ask a clarifying question, and both times he answered precisely, without excess, which was exactly what she needed. He remembered dates and names and the specific circumstances of every land acquisition he had ever made, with the clarity of someone who had understood from the beginning that those details would matter someday. When he was done, she had 4 pages of notes in her own hand, compressed and organized, the kind of notes she used to make when she was teaching, structured for use, not for appearance. "I'll have the letter ready to send when the storm breaks," she said. He stood up. It was past midnight. The rest of the house had been quiet for hours. "You should sleep," he said. "So should you." "I don't sleep well in storms," he said. It came out without particular drama, just a fact, offered the way he occasionally offered facts about himself, briefly and without elaboration, as though he was not entirely sure why he was saying it. "Neither do I," she said. "I never have. Thomas used to say I treated bad weather like a personal affront." Something shifted in his face at the mention of Thomas. Not jealousy. She did not think that was what it was. Something more careful than that. The look of a person stepping around a subject they do not know the full shape of. "Was he a good man?" Wyatt said. She had not expected the question. She took a moment with it, the honest way. "He was a decent man," she said. "He was not a strong one. But decent is not nothing." Wyatt nodded slowly. "No," he said. "It isn't." He took his lamp and went down the hall. She sat at the kitchen table for another hour, writing the letter to Ruth Calloway and listening to the storm, which had not let up and showed no intention of doing so. The storm ran 3 full days. By the second day, it was clear this was not ordinary winter weather. The snow was coming in sideways off the northern range, and the temperature had dropped to the kind of cold that didn't register as a feeling anymore, but as a constant structural fact. The kind of cold that got inside the walls if the fires weren't managed, that could kill animals not because of a single mistake, but because of a dozen small ones adding up. Wyatt was outside more than he was in. She understood that. The cattle needed management, keeping them from drifting, maintaining the windbreaks, checking the water sources that were freezing faster than expected. He came inside every few hours, and each time she had something hot ready because she had learned his pattern. He would eat standing up if she let him, so she put the food somewhere that required sitting, which forced him to stop for 5 minutes even when he didn't think he had 5 minutes. Dale ran the crew, she ran the house. That was the division, and it had never been stated as such, but by the second day of the storm, it was simply understood by everyone. On the second afternoon, one of the horses that had been struggling, the older mare Wyatt called Nettie, who had been fighting a respiratory problem since early January, got worse. The ranch hand assigned to her came to Amelia first, which told her something about how the house hierarchy had reorganized itself without announcement. She went to the barn. She was not a horse doctor. She made no claim of being one, but she had watched her father work with sick animals on the small farm where she grew up, and she had the useful quality of not panicking, which in a barn during a blizzard was worth more than a lot of specialized knowledge. She assessed the mare. Breathing was labored. The animal was not in distress exactly, but she was working hard at something that should have been easy. Amelia sent the hand for the warmest corner of the interior barn, more dry bedding, and a specific mixture she made from what was in the medicine kit. Not a cure, but a management, something to help the airways. She stayed with the horse for an hour. Wyatt came in from outside while she was still there. He stood in the barn doorway and looked at Nettie and then at Amelia, who was kneeling in the bedding with her coat on and her hair coming loose from its pin, talking to the animal in a low, steady voice. He did not say anything for a moment. Then, "She's been with me 11 years. Amelia looked up. "She's not dying today," she said, "but she needs to stay warm and she needs someone to check her every 2 hours tonight. I'll check her. You need to sleep. I told you I don't sleep well and you need to sleep," she said again, in a tone that was not harsh but was final. "I'll check her through the night. I'll wake you if she changes." He looked at her in the way he sometimes did, like he was trying to find the thing he could object to and not finding it. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know I don't have to," she said. "I'm going to." She checked the mare every 2 hours. By morning, Nettie was breathing easier. Not recovered, that would take longer, but stable, which was what mattered. Amelia had slept in fragments in the chair she'd pulled into the barn, waking at the right intervals with the particular internal clock she'd developed in the months after Thomas died, when she had been managing everything alone and couldn't afford to miss anything. She woke stiff and cold and with a crick in her neck that would bother her for 3 days. Wyatt found her there at 6 in the morning when he came out for the early check. She was awake, already standing, feeding Nettie a small amount of mash she'd prepared in the barn's small utility stove. He looked at her, at the horse, at the chair with the folded blanket over it. He didn't say thank you. She had noticed he was not a man who said thank you easily. Not because he was ungrateful, but because gratitude seemed to embarrass him slightly, like he wasn't sure he deserved to be cared for, and so expressions of care left him briefly without a response. What he did was take over feeding the mash so she could warm her hands, and then he stood next to her in the barn's early quiet and said, "She looks better." "She is better," Amelia said. "She needs another week of managed feeding before she's back to normal, but she's not going to die." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You sat up all night for a horse that's not yours." "She's not mine," Amelia said, and then stopped, because she had not meant to say that, not quite that way. He looked at her sideways. "I mean," she started. "I know what you mean," he said. She wasn't sure he did. She wasn't entirely sure she did. They fed the mare in silence and then went back to the house for coffee, and neither of them said anything about what had or hadn't been said. On the 3rd day of the storm, Cord did something he had not done before. He came to the kitchen, not at a mealtime. In the mid-afternoon, when the kitchen was Amelia's space, and everyone on the ranch understood that, the same way they understood that the north pasture in winter was Dale's domain and the main barn in a crisis was Wyatt's. Cord came to the kitchen door, knocked, and asked if he could speak to her. She stepped back and let him in without expression. He was a careful man physically, movements contained, nothing wasted. He stood near the door rather than coming fully into the room, which was either deference or the habit of someone who keeps an exit available. She noted it without judgment. "I need to say something," he said. "All right," she said. She kept her hands busy. She was rolling the remaining flour into a batch that would go into the oven tonight, and she did not stop doing that. Keeping her hands occupied kept her face neutral, which was useful. "I know you found the ledger discrepancy," he said. She kept rolling. "What makes you think that?" "Because you moved the ledger," he said, "on the 3rd morning, and after that you stopped leaving it on the table. And you've been watching me eat for 2 weeks in a way that isn't the same as the way you watch everyone else eat." She looked up from the dough. "I wasn't told to take anything," he said quickly, not defensively, but in the particular way of a man who has been rehearsing this and wants to get the important part out before his nerve fails. "I was told to adjust the numbers, small amounts. I was told it wouldn't matter, that it was just numbers on a page." "Who told you?" she said. He hesitated. "I already know who sent you here," she said. "I'm asking whether you knew what you were really doing." His jaw moved. "Not at first," he said. "By the time I understood, I had already been doing it for 4 months, and I needed this job." She put down the rolling pin. She looked at him straight on, the way she looked at everyone, not trying to intimidate, just not looking away. "What changed?" she said. "The storm," he said. And then he seemed to run out of words for a moment, which was the most honest thing she had seen from him. These men. They've been out in this for 3 days. Wyatt's been out there every day. Nobody's complaining. Nobody's... He stopped. I've worked for men who would have let the cattle go and stayed inside. Callahan hasn't slept. She was quiet. I don't want to be the thing that costs him his land, Cord said. Whatever Voss is planning, and I don't know all of it, I only know what he told me to do. I don't want to be part of it anymore. She studied him. He was not performing remorse. She had seen performed remorse enough in her life to know the difference. He was uncomfortable and ashamed and trying to do something about it, which was a different and more complicated thing. What do you know about Voss's plans? She said. I know about the easement filing, he said. He mentioned it once, said it was the first step. I don't know what the second step is. He doesn't tell me anything he doesn't need to. Were you reporting anything beyond the supply numbers? She said. Movement of men, he said. When Callahan was away from the ranch versus when he was on it. He wanted to know Callahan's travel patterns. She filed that away. Is there anyone else on this ranch reporting to Voss? Not that I know of, he said. But I didn't know Voss hired people cautiously. It's possible. She picked up the rolling pin again. Not because she needed to use it, because she needed something in her hands while she thought. Here is what you're going to do, she said. You're going to keep doing your work exactly as normal. You're not going to contact Voss. If he contacts you, you're going to tell him the storm has prevented any useful observation, and you'll report when there's something to report. Cord stared at her. You want me to... Stay in place, she said, and tell me if he contacts you directly. What he says, how, and when. And Callahan, he said. Does he know? Leave Callahan to me, she said. Cord was silent for a long moment, working through it. She could see the calculation, whether to trust her, whether this was itself some kind of test, whether the math of his situation had any outcome that looked better than this one. Why would you do this, he said. You could just let Callahan fire me. I could, she said. But you just told me something useful. And I think you might tell me something useful again. She met his eyes. That has more value right now than punishing you. He nodded once, slowly. Then he went back out into the storm. She stood at the table and looked at the dough for a moment without touching it. She would tell Wyatt tonight. She told Wyatt everything. She had committed to that, and she kept commitments. But she would tell him the right way, in the right order, with the context built in so he didn't react before she'd finished laying it out. She had, without quite planning it, acquired an inside position. She put it in that category in her mind, alongside the letter to Ruth Calloway and the documents Percy had retrieved and the 4 pages of notes she'd made about the North Corridor. She was building something, piece by piece, the way she had learned to build things since Thomas died, and there was no one else who would do the building. The difference was that this time she was not building alone. She was not entirely sure when that had changed. Wyatt listened to the account of Cord's visit with the stillness he used when he was managing a strong reaction. She had gotten good at reading that stillness. The difference between the stillness of a man with nothing to say and the stillness of a man with a great deal to say who is choosing not to say most of it. When she finished, he said, You made that call without me. I made it in the moment, she said. Cord came to me. I had about 40 seconds to decide. And you decided to keep him in place. Yes. Without asking me. She met his eyes. There was no time to ask you, and I think the decision was right. If you disagree, tell me now. He was quiet. The fire. The storm, which had finally begun to weaken after 3 days, had dropped to a sustained wind rather than a driving one. I don't disagree, he said, but I need to know when you make calls like that. I told you as soon as I could, she said. That's the commitment I made, and I kept it. Another pause. You're right, he said. It came out like something he'd had to pick up off the floor and hand to her, not unwillingly, but with a slight effort. She nodded. Let it settle. Voss is watching your travel patterns, she said. Cord was reporting when you were off the ranch. That means Voss has been calculating when the ranch is most exposed. Wyatt's expression didn't change, but his hands, flat on the table, pressed down slightly harder. He's been waiting for me to be away. Or he's been building a picture of when it would be safe to make a move that requires your absence, she said, which suggests whatever step 3 is, it requires access to the property without you on it. He stared at the table for a moment. Then he looked up. The North Corridor Gate. She waited. There's a county access gate on the north end of the corridor, he said. It's been padlocked since I bought the land. Part of the original purchase agreement included an acknowledgement from the county that the gate would remain under my control. He paused. But if Voss can establish the easement claim, he could petition to have that gate reclassified as a public access point, which would require a county inspection, she said, which would require someone from the county to physically access the property. Which would be easiest, he said, when I was not on the property to contest it. They looked at each other. He was going to wait for you to travel, she said. Get a county inspector out there under some pretext. Document the gate. Build the physical evidence for the easement claim. With Cord telling him when I was gone, he said. Yes. The storm had dropped to almost nothing outside. In the sudden relative quiet, the house settled around them. Creaks and ticks of wood, the sound of the fire, the particular silence of a structure that has held against something difficult and is now resting. We need to get that letter to Ruth Calloway, Wyatt said. The moment the roads are passable, she said. Dale can ride tomorrow. Dale, she said carefully, or Percy? Wyatt looked at her. Percy again. Dale is your foreman. If Voss sees Dale writing to Helena, he reads it correctly. Percy is a young hand who goes into town. Nobody watches him. You've thought about this carefully, he said. I've had 3 days in a storm with not much else to do, she said. That surprised something out of him. Not quite a laugh, but the involuntary loosening at the corners of his mouth that served the same function. She had seen it twice before. Both times it had caught her slightly off guard, because it changed his face entirely, briefly made him look like the younger man he must have been before 18 years of this territory had settled into him. Amelia, he said. She had not expected her name. He rarely used it. He said you or he said nothing and looked at her, and that functioned as a name. Yes, she said. Why are you doing this? He said. Not aggressively. Genuinely. Like a man who has been wondering something for several weeks and has finally decided to ask it. She thought about it honestly. Because it's in front of me, she said. Because I can see it and I know what to do about it. And because... She stopped. Because, he said. She looked at him directly. Because this is my home now, she said. Whether or not that was what either of us expected when I stepped off that train. The word home sat in the air between them. She had not planned to say it. She was not in the habit of saying things she had not planned, which meant something had gotten past her guard. Wyatt did not answer right away. He looked at her with an expression she could not fully name, something that was not quite surprise and not quite recognition, and was probably a mixture of things that had been building since the first morning she reorganized his kitchen and asked his foreman about the horse feed. All right, he said finally. Just that. But the way he said it was different from the way he usually said it. Not the clipped acknowledgement that ended a practical exchange, but something that opened rather than closed. She stood up and began clearing the table. Dale should take the morning check on Nettie, she said. I want to revise the letter to Calloway now that we know about the gate. Tonight? He said. The roads will be passable by morning, she said. That means Percy leaves at first light. That means the letter needs to be ready tonight. He picked up his lamp, stood for a moment near the door. The letter from Philadelphia, he said. The one Voss sent to stop you from coming. She looked at him. I'm glad his horse threw a shoe, he said. Then he went down the hall. She stood at the table for a moment, holding a coffee cup, not moving. Then she sat back down and opened her notebook and began writing the letter that would start the fight back. Outside, the storm had gone quiet. The snow was deep and the night was clear, and the stars over the Montana ranch were the kind of stars you only saw when everything that usually obscured them had been cleared away. She wrote until the lamp burned low, and she did not notice the cold. Percy left before sunrise. Amelia had the letter ready and sealed and in his coat pocket before he had finished saddling his horse, and she had also put a folded piece of paper in the saddlebag with specific instructions, what to say to Ruth Calloway, in what order, and what to hand over versus what to describe verbally. She had done this because Percy was reliable and observant and had proven he could follow instructions in an unfamiliar situation, but she had also done it because the letter alone was not enough. Ruth Calloway needed to understand the urgency, and urgency was something that lived in tone and manner as much as in words on paper. Percy took the instructions without comment. He had the quiet competence now of someone who has been trusted with something real and does not want to waste it. "Don't stop in Blackridge on the way back," she said. "I wasn't planning to," he said. "Good." He rode out into the gray pre-dawn with the snow packed hard under his horse's hooves from 3 days of cold following the storm, and she watched him until the road bent and she couldn't see him anymore. She went back inside to start the morning. Cord contacted Voss on Friday. She knew because Cord told her, which was what she had asked him to do. He came to the kitchen at the end of the workday, when the other men had already gone to the bunkhouse, and he told her that Voss had sent a rider to the ranch perimeter, not onto the property, but close enough to pass a folded note through the fence line to the hand who did the eastern perimeter check, which happened to be Cord. The note said, "Weather clear, time to move. Confirm Callahan's schedule." She read it twice. "What did you write back?" "I said the storm delayed everything, no useful information. We'll report when there's something to report." Did he accept that? "The writer left," Cord said. No response. She folded the note. "Did anyone see the exchange?" "No," he said. "I was alone on the eastern line." She put the note in her apron pocket. "Go eat," she said. He left. She stood at the stove and looked at the pot that didn't need looking at and thought. Voss was moving. The storm had delayed his timeline, but had not changed it. Time to move meant he had something scheduled, something that required coordination, not just patience. The county inspector theory was still the most likely step 3, but Cord had confirmed he didn't know the full plan, which meant there was a piece she was missing. She needed to find it before Percy got back from Helena, because once Ruth Calloway entered the picture, the timeline would accelerate. An attorney filing a counterclaim was a signal flare. Voss would know they'd found the easement filing. After that, everything he'd been doing slowly would start happening fast. She told Wyatt after supper. She put the note on the table between them. He read it, set it down, said, "Time to move." "He has something scheduled," she said. "Something that doesn't depend on you being away from the ranch specifically. Or he'd have asked Cord for your schedule. He said confirm Callahan's schedule, which means he wants to know where you are, but what he's planning can happen regardless." "A county inspector could come with or without my knowledge," Wyatt said slowly. "Yes. Your presence on the property complicates it, but doesn't prevent it. A county official has the right to inspect a claimed easement point regardless of the property owner's cooperation, as long as they have the filing documentation." "So he's not waiting for me to leave," Wyatt said. "He's just trying to know where I am so he can plan around me." "Which is different from what I thought 3 days ago," she said. He looked at her. "You were wrong." "About that part," she said. "Yes." He nodded. Not satisfied, but not the kind of man who was ever satisfied when a problem got more complicated, but also not the kind of man who needed to make something of a mistake that had already been acknowledged. She appreciated that about him more than she had expected to. "I should go to Helena myself," he said. "No," she said immediately. Voss wants to know where you are," she said. "If you leave for Helena, he knows you found something and you're filing a response. He moves immediately, before you can get back, before Ruth Calloway can prepare anything. You need to be here, visible, on the property. And the attorney. Percy will be back in 2 days," she said. "Let Calloway make her initial assessment before you're in contact with her directly. That way, if Voss has eyes on the Helena County office, he sees a young ranch hand, not the property owner." Wyatt sat back in his chair. He had a way of occupying a chair that was different from most men. He didn't spread or settle or relax into it. He sat in it with a kind of contained readiness, like a man who might need to stand up quickly. She had noticed it early and filed it as a detail about who he was, someone who had never quite allowed himself to stop being ready for what came next. "This is your plan," he said. "Not mine." "It's the best plan available," she said. "If you have a better one, tell me." "I don't have a better one," he said. And then more quietly, "I'm not sure I would have had this one." She was careful with that. She did not accept it too readily or deflect it too completely. "You would have," she said. "You would have gotten there." "Maybe," he said, "but slower. And slower matters here." She looked at the note on the table. "I want to know what time to move means specifically," she said. "I want to know what's actually scheduled. And I think the only way to know that is to find out what Voss has filed in the last week." You can't send Percy back to Helena the same week he just went. I'm not going to send Percy, she said. He looked at her. She could see him understand it before she said it. No, he said. I need to go myself, she said. I know what I'm looking for now. I know how to read the filings. Percy is reliable, but he doesn't know land law, and there's a limit to what written instructions can compensate for. Helena is 2 days' ride, he said, in February, after a major storm. The roads are passable, she said. Percy just rode them. Percy is 23 and I grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania, she said. I've been in bad weather before. This isn't Pennsylvania weather. She looked at him steadily. I know that, she said. I've been here long enough. He stood up, walked to the window. She had come to understand that the window was his thinking place. That when he went to it, he was not avoiding the conversation. He was processing it while still being in the room. I'll go with you, he said. You can't, she said. You just said you need to stay visible. Dale is your foreman, not you, she said. Voss is watching this property. If you leave for 2 days the week after a major storm, when there's work to be done that only you would normally oversee, he'll notice, and he'll draw the correct conclusion. The window said nothing useful. The dark outside was full of the cold that followed the storm, which was a different kind of cold than the storm itself. Cleaner, harder, the kind that would hold for another month at least. I don't like it, he said. I know, she said. I'm asking you not to go. She paused. She had not expected that. Not the formal version. Not I'm asking you. That was a different kind of statement than an objection or a practical argument. That was personal, and he did not do personal easily. I hear you, she said, and I'm going anyway. He turned from the window. Not because your opinion doesn't matter, she said carefully, but because this needs to be done and I'm the one who can do it. And I think, if you're honest with yourself, you know that. He looked at her for a long moment. His face was doing the thing it sometimes did where it was very controlled and very alive at the same time, underneath the control. Take Percy, he said. Percy just rode to Helena and back. Take Percy, he said again. He goes with you or you don't go. That's not negotiable. She considered it. Percy would slow her slightly. She would need to account for him, include him, explain things as she went. But he had also proven, twice now, that he was worth accounting for. All right, she said. Percy goes. Wyatt nodded once. He looked like a man who has just agreed to something that cost him something he could not entirely name. Be back in 3 days, he said. Not 4. 3 days, she said. She told Percy that night. He accepted it with the same uncomplicated reliability he had brought to the first Helena trip, except this time there was less of the initial terror and more of something that looked like purpose. They left the next morning. She rode better than Percy had expected. She had mentioned the farm in Pennsylvania, but not the years her father had kept horses, or the fact that she had ridden every day of her life until she was 19 and moved to the city. She did not explain it now. She just rode, and Percy adjusted his pace to match hers rather than the other way around. The road to Helena in February was navigable but honest about its conditions. There were places where the snow had drifted and the track was guesswork, places where the road surface itself had been damaged by the freeze-thaw cycle in the weeks before the big storm and would need repair in spring. They moved at a reasonable pace and did not push the horses, and by the end of the first day they had covered more ground than Percy had expected. That night they stopped at a way station, a rough building maintained for travelers, with a stove and basic provisions and 4 bunks that were occupied by 3 other travelers already, 2 men and a woman who was traveling with her son. Amelia made a point of speaking to the woman, whose name was Clara, and who was relocating to join her sister after her husband's death the previous autumn. And she did it not for information, but because Clara had the look of someone who had been keeping herself together through force of will for months, and had not had another woman to talk to in a long time. They talked for an hour while Percy played a rudimentary card game with the 2 men on the other side of the room. Clara cried once, briefly, and did not apologize for it, and Amelia did not offer the empty reassurances that people sometimes offered in those moments. She just stayed present, which was what was needed. When Clara's son fell asleep and Clara herself began to fade, Amelia sat by the stove for a while and thought about all the women who moved through this territory carrying everything they owned and everything they'd lost, making the calculations about what the next place might offer, whether it would be better or just different. She had made those calculations herself 4 months ago, sitting in a cold room in Philadelphia with an arrangement letter from a marriage agency and a letter of uncertain origin telling her not to come. She thought about what Wyatt had said. "I'm glad his horse threw a shoe." She had been turning that over since he said it, the way you turn over a small stone you've found that is more interesting than stones usually are. She had not let herself do too much with it. She was careful with hope. She had learned to be. Hope that attached itself too firmly to something specific had a way of becoming a liability. But she was aware, sitting by that stove in a way station in February, in the middle of Montana territory, that something had shifted in the past several weeks that she had not budgeted for. That the ranch was beginning to feel like the thing she had been afraid it would become. That Wyatt Callahan, difficult, contained, not easy to know, and not trying to be, had stopped being a circumstance and started being something she thought about when she wasn't thinking about anything in particular. She put that away carefully. There was work to do first. They reached Helena on the afternoon of the second day, and Amelia went directly to the county records office before it closed. The clerk at the records office was a different one than Percy had dealt with on his trip. A middle-aged man with spectacles and an expression of professional indifference that Amelia recognized as the particular armor of someone whose job required them to deal with the public all day without caring too much about any individual in it. She did not try to charm him. She was direct about what she needed. All filings under the name Voss or the Western Horizons brokerage in the past 90 days, specifically anything touching county parcels in the Black Ridge territory. He looked at her over his spectacles. Relationship to the property. "I'm the wife of Wyatt Callahan," she said. "The parcel in question is Callahan land." He looked at her a moment longer. Then he pulled the ledger and found the index and wrote down 3 numbers on a slip of paper and went into the back room and came out with 3 folders. She sat at the reading table and went through them. The first was the easement filing she already knew about. The second was an amendment to that filing, submitted 10 days ago, during the storm, adding a supplementary affidavit from a man named Gerald Pitts, who claimed to have used the North Corridor transit route as a licensed cattle driver in 1879, 3 years before Wyatt had acquired the land. She read the Pitts affidavit twice. The language was specific in the ways that suggested it had been written by someone other than Pitts. It used legal terminology correctly, it referenced the precise parcel designation, and it described the North Corridor with an accuracy that would have required either extensive personal knowledge or a detailed property description to work from. The third folder stopped her. It was not a land filing. It was a petition to the County Board of Commissioners, filed 8 days ago, requesting an emergency inspection of the North Corridor gate on the grounds that the pending easement claim created a public access obligation that the county was legally required to assess before the spring cattle season. An emergency inspection request, filed during the storm, when travel was difficult and responses were slow and the property owner's ability to respond was compromised. She sat with that for a moment. Emergency inspections did not require notice to the property owner under current county practice. They required only the commissioner's approval, which was a single signature. And if the commissioner in question had any kind of relationship with Voss, financial, political, professional, that signature might already be arranged. She copied the key details from all 3 folders in her notebook, working fast, and asked the clerk for the name of the county commissioner currently assigned to the Black Ridge Land District. He told her without checking, Commissioner Albert Greer. She thanked him and left. Percy was waiting outside with the horses. She gave him the summary in 4 sentences as they walked toward the hotel where they'd arranged to stay, and she watched him process it. "He filed during the storm," Percy said, "when nobody could respond." "Yes, he stopped. "That's not an accident." "No," she said, "it isn't." "What do we do?" "We find Ruth Calloway tonight," she said, "before anything else." Ruth Calloway's office was above a dry goods store on the main street of Helena, accessible by an external staircase that was icy enough that Amelia took the railing with both hands. The light was on in the window, which she had been counting on. She had asked the hotel clerk, who seemed to know most things about the town, and the clerk had said Calloway worked late, that she was the kind of woman who worked late because she had more cases than hours, and because she'd told someone once that she did her best thinking after dark. Ruth Calloway was perhaps 50, with gray at her temples and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead like she'd forgotten they were there, and she looked at Amelia and Percy with the assessing calm of someone who had learned a long time ago to judge people quickly and accurately because the wrong clients cost more than no clients at all. She had received Amelia's letter. She had already pulled the Callahan parcel records from her own files, which meant she had been following the Blackridge land situation as a matter of professional interest before they arrived. Amelia laid out everything in order: the original easement filing, the Pitts affidavit, the emergency inspection petition. She also described Cord and Voss and the letter sent to Philadelphia and the 7-minute meetings on Saturday mornings. She described it all with the same organized efficiency she used when she made her notes, and she watched Calloway's face as she listened, and what she saw there was not surprise but the particular alertness of a woman who is hearing a pattern confirm what she already suspected. When Amelia finished, Calloway set down her pen. "The Pitts affidavit is fabricated," Calloway said. "I can tell you that without checking. Gerald Pitts was a licensed cattle driver in this territory in 1879. That part's true. I've seen his name on driving records before, but he died in 1883. He cannot sign an affidavit in 1888. Amelia was still for a moment. "Voss filed a sworn affidavit from a dead man." "Someone signed it using Pitts's name," Calloway said, "which is forgery, which changes the nature of what you're dealing with considerably." Percy, who had been quiet in the corner, said, "That's a crime." "It is," Calloway said. "The question is proving it efficiently enough to stop the emergency inspection before it occurs." She looked at Amelia. "Do you know when the inspection is scheduled?" "I don't know if it's been approved yet," Amelia said. "I know when the petition was filed." "I know Albert Greer," Calloway said flatly. "He approved it. He approves everything Voss sends him." She picked up her pen again. "I need to file an emergency counterpetition tonight. It won't stop the inspection on its own, but it creates a legal record that the property owner has contested the proceeding, which changes the evidentiary standard." She looked up. "Can your husband be in Helena by the day after tomorrow?" Amelia thought of what she'd told Wyatt. 3 days, not 4. "Yes," she said. "I need him here to sign the counter-petition in person," Calloway said. "And I need every document you have, the original land purchase records, any communications from the county regarding the North Corridor, and anything that establishes continuous and exclusive use of that land since acquisition." "He has those records," Amelia said. "All of them. He keeps everything." Calloway looked at her for a moment. "You're certain?" "He told me every acquisition date and the circumstances of each one from memory," Amelia said. "For 18 years of land management. Yes, I'm certain." Something in Calloway's expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but the acknowledgement of something. "All right," she said. "I'll have the counter-petition drafted by morning. Come back at 8. Amelia stood up. Percy stood up. "Mrs. Callahan," Calloway said. Amelia turned. "Voss has done this before," Calloway said. "Not the forgery. That's new for him, which means he's escalating. But the pattern, the inside man, the easement claim, the emergency inspection. He did it to a rancher named Foster in 1885. Foster didn't know what was happening until the inspection had already been completed and the easement was recorded." "What happened to Foster?" Amelia said. "He sold," Calloway said, "at 40 cents on the dollar. He didn't have anyone who caught it in time." The lamp on Calloway's desk set its quiet piece. The wind outside was steady and cold and smelled like snow that had already fallen and snow that might fall again. "We caught it in time," Amelia said. "You did," Calloway said. "Get some sleep. 8 o'clock. She sent a rider back to the Callahan ranch that night with a message for Wyatt, 3 words and a date. "Come now." Thursday. She did not explain. There wasn't time, and Wyatt Callahan was not the kind of man who needed everything explained. He was the kind of man who, given 3 words and a date from someone he had decided to trust, would be on a horse by first light. She knew that about him. She was not entirely sure when she had started knowing things about him with that kind of confidence, but she did not examine the timing too closely. She and Percy were at Calloway's office at 8 the next morning. The counterpetition was 4 pages, dense with legal language that Amelia read carefully before Percy witnessed her signature on the sections she was authorized to sign as the property owner's spouse. Calloway had also, overnight, drafted a letter to the County Board of Commissioners formally disputing the Pitts affidavit on the grounds that Gerald Pitts had been deceased since 1883 and any document bearing his signature and post-dating his death was fraudulent on its face. That letter will cause some disruption in Greer's office, Calloway said. Good, Amelia said. It will also reach Voss, Calloway said, which means he'll know you've found the forgery. He may try to move the inspection up. Can he? If Greer cooperates, Calloway said, which he might. Then we need Wyatt here as fast as possible, Amelia said. Yes, Calloway said, and we need the original land records. Amelia nodded. She was calculating. Wyatt would get her message today, leave this morning or at noon at the latest, travel through the night if needed because he would understand from 3 words what the situation required. He could be in Helena by tomorrow evening. Thursday was the day she'd given him. She'd built a half-day buffer, which now seemed right. There's one more thing, Calloway said. She opened the top folder on her desk and slid a single piece of paper across. I pulled the Black Ridge County Property Register this morning. Current listings. Amelia looked at the paper. There was a listing circled in pencil. A property adjacent to the North Corridor, listed as having transferred ownership 8 months ago to a holding company called Meridian Land Partners. Cord had been hired 7 months ago. The holding company acquisition and Cord's arrival at the Callahan Ranch were separated by 30 days. Meridian Land Partners, Amelia said, is a company registered in Missouri with no listed principals, Calloway said, but the registered agent's address is the same building as Harlan Voss's land brokerage. Amelia set the paper down. Voss had bought the adjacent land first, then placed Cord in the Callahan operation, then filed the easement claim, then filed the forged affidavit, then petitioned for the emergency inspection. Each step had created the conditions for the next one. The adjacent land purchase meant Voss had a financial stake in the corridor access. It made his easement claim look like a legitimate property dispute rather than predation. Cord had provided the operational intelligence to time everything. The easement and the forged affidavit had created the legal basis for the inspection. And the inspection, if it succeeded, would establish the physical record that made the easement real. It was patient, it was thorough, and it had been in motion for 8 months before Amelia had arrived in Black Ridge on a train that almost didn't have her on it. He almost got away with it, she said. He still might, Calloway said. If your husband isn't here by Thursday. He'll be here, Amelia said. She said it with a certainty that surprised her slightly, coming out of her own mouth. Not the certainty of someone performing confidence, the certainty of someone who knows the person they are speaking about and knows what that person does when something requires them. She thought briefly about the way Wyatt had said, "I'm asking you not to go." The effort it had cost him to say it. The way he had then said, "Take Percy," instead of repeating the request, which was the action of a man who had accepted that asking was not enough and chosen instead to do what he could within the limits of what she had decided. She thought about Nettie in the barn, and coffee kept warm in the pot, and the 4 pages of land acquisition history he had given her from memory in a single conversation. She thought about the letter to Philadelphia, written by a man who had never met her, designed to send her back before she arrived, and the horse with the thrown shoe on the road 2 miles outside of town. She collected the papers Calloway had prepared and put them in the satchel she'd brought and stood up. "One more question," she said. "The forgery charge, if we can prove it, what does that do to the easement claim?" "Invalidates the primary supporting document," Calloway said. "Without the Pitts affidavit, the claim rests on Voss's assertion of historical use alone, with no corroborating evidence. It doesn't automatically kill the claim, but it makes it almost indefensible." "And Commissioner Greer," Amelia said, "if he approved an inspection based on a fraudulent petition." Calloway's expression was careful. "That is a conversation that could go several directions," she said, "depending on whether Greer knew the affidavit was fraudulent." "If he didn't know," Amelia said, "he's an embarrassed official who approved a bad petition." "Yes." "If he did know," Amelia said, "he's complicit in a fraud against a private landowner." "Yes," Calloway said, "which is a considerably more serious conversation." Amelia thought about the pattern, the timing, the way Voss had operated for years in the spaces between what was visible and what could be proven, the way he had been careful until the forgery, which was new, which Calloway had said meant he was escalating. Men escalated when they felt pressure. Voss had escalated after Amelia arrived at the ranch. She had been, from the first moment she stepped off that train, the thing he had not planned for. "I want to understand Greer's relationship with Voss fully," she said. Before Thursday. Is there a way to find that out without alerting either of them? Calloway looked at her for a long moment. I may know someone in the commissioner's office who would speak informally, she said, on the understanding that it was informal. Can you make that conversation happen today? Calloway looked at the clock on her wall. I can try, she said. Please, Amelia said. We won't have another chance to know this before it matters. She left Percy with Calloway. He was useful in the office, organized and quick to file, and she had found that Calloway seemed to work better when she had someone to hand things to. And she walked back out onto the main street of Helena in February with the cold hitting her face and the satchel over her shoulder, and the particular focused energy of someone who can see the shape of what needs to happen and is moving toward it. She found a telegraph office 2 blocks from Calloway's building. She wrote a message to Wyatt, longer than the writer message because now she had more to say, and paid for it and watched the operator key it out. Then she went back to wait. Wyatt arrived in Helena on Thursday morning, 6 hours before the counterpetition needed to be filed. She heard the horse in the yard of the hotel and looked out the window and felt something she did not immediately try to name, something that lived in the chest rather than the mind, that was relief and something adjacent to relief, but not exactly the same thing. He looked like he had ridden through the night, which he had. His coat was white with frost, and his face had the particular drawn quality of someone who has been cold for a long time and is not going to say so. He had the document satchel she had described in the telegraph, all the land records, the original purchase agreements, the county correspondence going back 18 years. He had also brought Dale. She raised an eyebrow when she saw Dale coming through the hotel door behind him. I wasn't leaving the ranch without someone who could handle whatever Voss tried while I was gone, Wyatt said. Dale's brother is covering the crew. She accepted this. It was reasonable. It was also, she noted, the action of a man who had thought carefully about all the contingencies before he left, which was not the action of someone who was simply reacting. He had made a plan. He had made a plan based on what she'd sent him in the time available and arrived with what was needed. She said, Ruth Calloway's office. Now, she needs those documents before 10. He said, I haven't slept. I know, she said. After. He almost said something. The something lived briefly in his expression and then resolved into the familiar control. He picked up the satchel, and they went. What's? The counterpetition was filed at 9:40. Calloway walked them through it piece by piece in her office, Wyatt signing where required, Amelia signing where she was authorized, Dale witnessing. The Pitts forgery documentation was attached as supporting evidence. The land records Wyatt had brought established continuous and exclusive use of the North Corridor since 1870, predating the earliest date Voss's claim could reference. When it was done, Calloway set her pen down and looked at the stack of signed documents. This doesn't end it, she said. Voss will challenge. Greer will stall. You should expect this to be a 6-month process at minimum. I understand, Wyatt said, but the forgery charge changes the character of the dispute, Calloway said. A land broker who files fraudulent affidavits has a different set of problems than a land broker who files aggressive easement claims. One is hardball business. The other is criminal fraud. She looked at him. He overreached. Why, Wyatt said. He was patient for 3 years. Calloway glanced at Amelia briefly. Something changed his timeline, she said. Wyatt looked at Amelia too. She kept her face still. I'll need you available by correspondence for the next several weeks, Calloway said, addressing Wyatt but looking at both of them. And I'll need you to maintain normal ranch operations. Nothing that looks like you're preparing for a legal fight. Voss may try to manufacture additional evidence if he thinks he's losing. He'll try to use cord, Amelia said. Wyatt looked at her. Cord is still in place, she said to Calloway. He's been feeding Voss incomplete information on my instruction, but Voss will push harder now that the counterpetition is filed. Cord will need to know what to say. Calloway considered this. That's a risk. Everything about this is a risk, Amelia said, but Cord is the only direct line we have to Voss's thinking. I'm not ready to close that. Wyatt was quiet for a moment. Then, your call, he said. She looked at him. It was simply said, not reluctant, not performative. Your call. She held it for a second. Then she said, I'll manage Cord. If anything changes, I'll tell you. He nodded. Calloway looked between them with the expression of someone observing something they had not expected and have decided to keep to themselves. They left her office at noon. On the street outside, the February sun was pale and cold, and the snow on the Helena streets had been packed down to a gray-white crust by a week of foot and wagon traffic. Dale had gone to arrange fresh horses for the ride back. Wyatt and Amelia stood on the boardwalk for a moment in a silence that was not uncomfortable but was full of things neither of them was saying. "You should sleep before we ride back," she said. 2 hours, he said. "Then we leave." She nodded. She turned to go toward the hotel. "Amelia." She stopped. He was looking at her with the expression she had been trying to name for weeks, the one that lived underneath all the management and the control, the one that came out briefly at odd moments and then retreated before she could look at it directly. "The counterpetition," he said. "Calloway said you'd been here 2 days building the case, that you came in on the first evening and had her working by morning." "There wasn't time to do it slowly," she said. "I know," he said. "That's not—" He stopped, started again. "I've been building this ranch for 18 years. I know how to fight for land, but I wouldn't have known what to look for. I wouldn't have known about the forgery, or the Pitts affidavit, or the Meridian Holding Company. I would have been responding to the inspection by the time I understood what was happening." She waited. "You came 3 months ago," he said. "You didn't know any of this territory. You didn't know the law, the people, the—" "I knew how to read documents," she said, "and I knew how to watch." "That's not a small thing," he said. "No," she said. "It isn't." They looked at each other in the thin February sunlight, and she felt again the thing she had been careful with. The thing she had been telling herself was not yet something she could afford to feel fully. She was still being careful with it now, but it was harder than it had been. 2 hours, she said. "Then we ride." She went inside. He stood on the boardwalk for a moment longer, looking at the door she'd gone through, and he had the particular expression of a man who is beginning to understand that the thing he built his life around, the self-sufficiency, the management, the careful containment of everything that could go wrong, had been missing something for a very long time, and that the missing thing had arrived on a train in January in a coat that was not warm enough for this territory, carrying her own bags and asking about the state of the kitchen. He went inside. He slept for 2 hours and 15 minutes because she knocked on his door at the 2-hour mark, and he did not wake immediately, and she gave him the extra 15 minutes because she was not unmerciful. Then they rode back to the ranch together, through the cold Montana afternoon, with the land records and the counterpetition and the knowledge of what Harlan Voss had done and what was coming next. The ranch was waiting. The spring was still weeks away. And nothing had been won yet. Only the conditions for winning had been built. But those conditions had not existed 3 months ago. 3 months ago, Wyatt Callahan had been alone on 12,000 acres, with a planted spy in his crew and a fraudulent legal claim building against him, and no one who knew enough about any of it to begin to fight it. And then the train had come. The ride back from Helena took most of Thursday and all of Friday morning, and by the time the Callahan ranch came into view through the bare February trees, Amelia had been away from it for 4 days. She had not expected to feel what she felt when she saw it. It was not a beautiful ranch by any standard she could have named. The main house was practical rather than handsome. The barn was larger than the house, which was always a frontierman's priority and always said something about frontier men. And the yard between the structures had the particular churned quality of ground that too many boots and too many hooves had worked over through a long winter. There was nothing about it that would have made anyone stop on the road and admire it. She felt something loosen in her chest when she saw it, something she had been holding without knowing she was holding it. She did not say anything about this. She rode into the yard and dismounted and handed her horse to Percy, who took both animals to the barn with the efficiency of someone who has learned which tasks just need doing, and she went inside. The kitchen was in acceptable order. Dale's brother, a quieter version of Dale, taller, less likely to offer opinions unprompted, had kept the fires going and had not disturbed any of her organizational systems, which she appreciated more than she would have said out loud. There was a pot of something on the stove that smelled like it had been there since morning. She tasted it, adjusted 2 things, put the lid back. She heard Wyatt come in behind her. He went directly to the table and sat down. which was the first time in 4 days she had seen him sit without the forward lean of someone who might need to stand again immediately. The tension in his shoulders was different on this side of the counter-petition. Still there, the legal fight was far from over, but different in character. Like the difference between a man who doesn't know an attack is coming and a man who is ready for it. "Cord," he said. "I'll talk to him this evening," she said. "He needs to know what happened in Helena without knowing too much of what happened in Helena." "How do you walk that line?" "I tell him we found the forgery and filed the counter-petition and that Voss will know by now. I tell him to expect Voss to push harder and to tell me everything Voss says when he pushes." She brought 2 cups to the table and sat across from him. "I don't tell him about Calloway or the specific evidence. If Voss somehow gets Cord to share everything Cord knows, I want there to be a limit to what that is." Wyatt nodded slowly. He was looking at his coffee. "And Cord himself. Do you trust him?" She considered it honestly. "I trust that he's more afraid of where he is than of where Voss is," she said, "which is a different thing from trust, but functions the same way for now." He accepted that. "Greer," he said, "Calloway believes she can get a formal inquiry into his relationship with Voss through the county board," she said. "Not quickly. But the forgery charge creates a procedural obligation that's hard to bury without making it worse." "Months," he said. "Yes," she said. "Probably spring before anything is decided formally." He was quiet. The fire in the kitchen stove had gotten low while they were talking, and she got up and added wood to it without interrupting herself. And he watched her do it and said nothing, which was its own kind of normal. The normalcy of 2 people in a kitchen who had stopped needing to account for each other's movements. "The men will need to know something," he said. "Not everything, but the crew knows something is wrong. You don't run a ranch through a storm and then ride to Helena and back without the crew drawing conclusions. Tell them there was a legal matter regarding the North Corridor land," she said, "that it's being handled, that their work is what kept the property viable through the winter, and that matters." "You want me to thank them?" "I want you to tell them the truth," she said, "which is that the ranch is still standing partly because of how they worked this winter. That's not flattery. That's a fact." He looked at her across the table. She had said it matter-of-factly, the way she said most things, but something in it had landed with him. She could see it in the slight change of his expression, the way certain observations from her seemed to arrive differently than they would from anyone else. She was not sure what to do with that. She was still figuring out what she was allowed to want in this place, in this arrangement that had become something neither of them had written to the agency about. She talked to Cord that evening. He already knew something had shifted. She could see it in the set of his face when she found him at the end of the work line, in the particular alertness of someone who has been waiting for an outcome and is trying to read which way it went. She told him what she had told Wyatt she would tell him. The forgery had been found. The counter-petition was filed. Voss would know by now, or would know very soon. Cord listened without interrupting. When she was done, he said, "He's going to be angry." "Yes," she said. "When Voss is angry, he gets direct," Cord said. "He stops being careful." She looked at him. "You've seen him angry before." "Once," Cord said, "with the Foster Ranch. When Foster started asking questions, Voss, he went around the legal approach. He had someone damage Foster's north fence line, made it look like vandalism, but the timing was deliberate. It pulled Foster's men away from the east boundary the day the county inspector came through." She was very still. "He manufactured a distraction." "Yes," Cord said. "He used the disruption to create space for the inspection to proceed without interference." She thought about the Callahan Ranch, the east boundary, the North Corridor gate, the 12,000 acres of land that required constant management and offered 100 possible points of disruption if someone understood its operations. Cord had told Voss all of that. "Is there anything specific he asked you about?" she said, "in terms of which parts of the property are most difficult to manage?" Cord was quiet for a moment. "He asked about the river crossing on the northwest boundary," he said. "In January. He asked how often it was checked in winter." She made a note in her memory and did not let her face show what she was thinking. The river crossing was one of 3 points where the cattle could be pushed if they were disturbed at night, away from the main pasture toward the boundary, somewhere that would require significant effort and attention to recover them. In February, with the ground frozen, A livestock disturbance at the river crossing would pull every available man away from the property center for hours. Tell me if he contacts you, she said. Any contact, any method, immediately. Yes, Cord said. She walked back to the house. The night was clear and cold with the particular clarity that followed a long storm, the sky enormous and dark and indifferent, and she walked through it thinking about timing and about what a man who was getting direct might do and when he might do it. She told Wyatt that night. He listened to the river crossing detail with the expression she had come to know as his genuine listening face, not the managed attention he used in the kind of interaction where he was already forming a response, but the real, prior kind, where he was taking everything in before he decided what it meant. He'll try to run the cattle, Wyatt said. I think so, she said. Not necessarily himself. He'll hire someone, the way he hired Cord, but he'll time it to the inspection, if he can still get the inspection to proceed. Can he? Calloway doesn't think so, she said. Not with the counter-petition filed and the forgery documented. But can't proceed and won't try are different. Wyatt leaned back in his chair. He did something he rarely did. He rubbed his hand across his face briefly, the motion of a man who is tired and is not going to say so. She noticed it and said nothing. I'm going to put 2 men on the river crossing at night, he said, starting tomorrow. Quietly, she said, if Voss has any other eyes on the ranch that we haven't found, I don't want it to look like we're specifically protecting that point. Quietly, he agreed. Dale and Percy. They're already the 2 who know most of what's happening. She nodded. Then she said, the inspection petition. Calloway said she expected to receive a formal response from the commissioner's office by the end of the week. If Greer denies the counter-petition, he won't, Wyatt said. Not with the forgery on record. He's not brave enough. She looked at him. How do you know that? I've known Greer for 10 years, he said. He's a man who takes money to make things easy for people. He is not a man who takes money to make things hard for himself. The moment this became something that could attach to him personally, he'll step back from it. She absorbed this. She had been working on Greer as an unknown variable for 4 days. Wyatt had known him for 10 years and was telling her, without elaboration, that Greer was a coward with a price rather than a zealot with a commitment. That was useful, and she should have asked him sooner. You should have told me that in Helena, she said. You didn't ask, he said. Not defensively, just a fact. I'm asking now, she said. Everything you know about Voss's relationships in this county. All of it. Who he has, who he owes, who owes him. They talked for 2 more hours. She made notes. By the end, she had a clearer picture of the landscape Voss operated in than anything she could have gotten from county records alone. The human landscape, the debts and favors and quiet understandings that never appeared in any filing. It was after midnight when they stopped. The fire had gotten low again. You should have been talking to me like this from the beginning, she said. Not critically, just observationally. I know, he said. Why weren't you? He was quiet for a moment. The question was real and they both knew it. And he was the kind of man who, when he respected a real question, tried to give it a real answer. I'm not used to it, he said, talking through problems with someone. I've been the one who held everything for a long time. It doesn't come naturally, sharing the weight. It doesn't for me either, she said. I managed everything alone for 2 years after Thomas died. I told myself I preferred it. Did you? No, she said. I just convinced myself I did because the alternative, needing someone who might leave or fail or die, seemed like more risk than I could take. The fire ticked in the stove. Somewhere outside, an animal made a sound and then was quiet. Thomas died and you kept going, Wyatt said. I didn't have a choice, she said. You had choices, he said. You made the hard ones. That's not the same as not having them. She looked at him. He was looking at the table, not at her, in the way he sometimes looked at things when he was saying something that cost him some effort to say. Claire died, she said carefully. 8 years ago. Yes, he said. And you kept going. I didn't do it as well as you, he said. I just kept the ranch running. I kept everything external running. The inside, he stopped. The inside of this house was empty for 8 years. You've been here 3 months. She did not say anything immediately. She understood what he was telling her, the shape of it, even though he was telling it in the sidelong way he had of saying important things. never quite direct, never quite looking at the thing straight on. "I've been afraid," she said, finally, "of letting this become something I couldn't leave if I needed to." "And now," he said. She took her time with it. She owed him that. Not the quick answer, not the managed one, but the honest one that she'd been keeping at arm's length for 3 months. "I don't want to leave," she said. "I'm not afraid of that anymore. I'm afraid of other things. But not that." He looked up from the table. She held his gaze. She was not performing steadiness. She actually was steady, which surprised her slightly, because 3 months ago she would not have predicted this. "I'm not easy to live with," he said. "I know," she said. "Neither am I." I'm not good at the talking part," he said, "as you've noticed." "You've been getting better," she said, something that was almost a smile. "That's a low bar." "It's a real one," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I don't want this to be an arrangement anymore." She waited. "I want it to be what it's been becoming," he said, "which is something I didn't plan and can't fully describe, but which is the best thing that's happened on this ranch in a very long time." She looked at him for a moment. Wyatt Callahan, who said approximately 30 words a day and had just spent more emotional currency in one sentence than she had heard from him in 3 months combined. "All right," she said, and then, because she was not going to let him carry that all alone, "Same." He nodded, slowly, the way he nodded when he had made a decision and was at peace with it. They sat in the kitchen for a while longer, not talking about anything in particular, and it was the most ordinary thing that had happened between them. The ease of two people who have stopped performing and started simply being in the same room. Voss made his move on a Tuesday night, 3 weeks later. She had been half expecting it. The commissioner's office had formally declined to proceed with the inspection pending review of the forgery evidence. Wyatt had been right about Greer, who had stepped back from the whole matter with the speed of a man who had just remembered an urgent appointment elsewhere, and Calloway had filed the forgery evidence with the county fraud office the same week. Voss was losing the legal approach, which meant Cord's warning about what Voss did when he got direct had been sitting in the back of her mind like a door she kept checking to see if it had opened. It opened on a Tuesday. At 11 at night, Dale came to the house fast and knocked twice, which was their agreed signal for something that required immediate attention. She was already awake. She had not been sleeping well, which she accepted as the cost of knowing what she knew. And she was dressed and at the door before the second knock finished. "River crossing," Dale said. Percy heard them. 2 men, maybe 3, pushing from the east. She said, "Wyatt." "Already going," Dale said. "He said for you to stay." "Get the lanterns," she said. "The full crew. Wake everyone." Dale looked at her for half a second. "Everyone, Dale?" she said. "Now." She went to the barn. Not to ride out, she was not a fool about what she was useful for and what she wasn't, but to open the second gate, the one that accessed the south pasture, which was where the cattle needed to be pushed if they were being moved at the crossing. If you closed the south gate, the cattle had nowhere to go but back north, which put them back on Callahan land regardless of what happened at the river. It was a simple piece of geography that would cost Voss's men everything they were working for if she could get to it in time. She got to it. She and Percy, who had been on the night watch and had spotted the movement and had sent Dale to the house and then stayed at his position, because Percy understood now how these things worked. She and Percy together pushed the south gate closed and bolted it in the dark with the sounds of the river crossing carrying across the frozen air. She heard the cattle from 200 yards away, the particular disturbed sound of animals that have been pushed against their instinct, not panicked, but unhappy, moving in the wrong direction. She heard Wyatt's voice once, directing men. Then the sounds changed. The cattle sound shifted from movement to settling, the slow calming of animals that have reached a limit and are no longer being pushed. It took an hour and a half to recover the full herd count. 2 of Voss's hired men were found on the property. They had not been fast enough once the south gate closed and the plan collapsed. And by morning they were in the custody of the Black Ridge sheriff, who had been roused by Dale at midnight and who arrived at the ranch at 2 in the morning with the particular expression of a man who had been waiting for years for something that would give him a legitimate reason to look at Harlan Voss. Cord identified both men as individuals he had seen entering Voss's office. He gave that information to the sheriff voluntarily, with Amelia present, in the ranch kitchen at 3 in the morning. Wyatt sat at the table and said nothing through most of it, and at the end said, "Thank you, Cord," which were 3 words he said with a plainness that made them mean more than they would have if he'd dressed them up. Cord nodded. He looked like a man who has put down something heavy and is not sure yet whether his hands work correctly without the weight. The sheriff left with both men and a written statement from 4 witnesses. He said, without particular enthusiasm, but without ambiguity either, that Harlan Voss would be receiving a formal inquiry regarding the hired interference and the fraudulent affidavit before the week was out. The door closed behind him, and the kitchen was quiet. Percy was sitting in the corner with his elbows on his knees and his head back against the wall, the posture of profound exhaustion. Dale was at the stove making coffee because Dale made coffee at every moment of crisis, which was one of his finest qualities. Cord was at the table, not sure whether to stay or go. Amelia looked at all of them. "Go sleep," she said. "All of you." Percy stood up. Dale finished the coffee and left a full pot. Cord went to the door and paused. "Mrs. Callahan," he said. She looked at him. "I'm sorry," he said. "For the months I'm sorry." She held his gaze for a moment. "You know the value of what you did tonight," she said. "Hold on to that." He went out. Wyatt was still at the table. He had not moved through any of it. Not the departure of the sheriff. Not the exit of the crew. Not the clearing of the room. He sat with his hands on the table and his coat still on, and the look of a man who has been running on reserve for a long time and has just reached the moment where the emergency has passed, and the body is beginning to understand that. She poured 2 cups from Dale's pot and sat across from him. He said, "The South Gate." "Yes," she said. "That was you." "Percy and me," she said. "Percy spotted them first." "But the gate was your idea." She said, "It was geography." He looked at her. He had the expression again, the one she had been learning to read, the one that lived below the management and the control and all 18 years of carrying everything alone. She had gotten better at seeing it. She was not sure she would ever get entirely used to it, which was probably the right outcome. "Amelia," he said. "I know," she said. He had not said what he was going to say yet, and she had already answered it, which made him stop and look at her with something that broke briefly through the surface. "You know," he said, "you were going to say that none of this would have worked without me here," she said. "That the gate, the counterpetition, the Pitts affidavit, Cord, that all of it required someone who caught things you didn't have time to catch." "Yes," he said. "And I was going to say that the ranch is what made all of that possible," she said. "Your 18 years of building it, your records, your knowledge of Greer and of the land and of every man on this crew. Without that foundation, I had nothing to work with." He was quiet. "We did it," she said. Simply. Not triumphantly, just the fact of it. "We did it," he said. She drank her coffee. It was 4 in the morning, and the ranch was quiet outside, and the kitchen was warm, and the case against Harlan Voss was in the hands of the sheriff and the county fraud office and Ruth Calloway, which was exactly where it needed to be. Spring came to Montana the way it always came. Not with any announcement, not with a single clear morning that was different from what came before, but gradually and then suddenly, the way most important changes arrive. One week, the ground was still locked and the breath still showed in the air. And then one morning, Amelia walked out to the kitchen garden she had started planting in February, and the soil turned under her spade with the particular dark richness of earth that has decided to be alive again. She planted what the ground could hold and the season would allow, which was not everything she had planned, but was enough. Harlan Voss was formally charged with filing a fraudulent affidavit in April. The forgery of Gerald Pitts's signature was confirmed by a document examiner from Helena, whose credentials were impeccable and whose testimony was brief and entirely sufficient. Commissioner Greer resigned his position 2 days after the charge was filed, citing personal reasons, which fooled no one in Black Ridge, but required no one to say out loud what everyone understood. The easement claim was dismissed. The Meridian Land Partners holding company quietly put its adjacent parcel back on the market. Cord stayed on at the ranch through the winter and into spring. He worked without complaint and without the careful invisibility he had maintained in the first months. He worked, instead, like a man who has decided that being seen clearly is less dangerous than he had believed. He was not forgiven by all of the crew, which he did not expect, and he did not ask for more than he was given. By April, he had settled into something approaching ordinary standing, which was probably the best available outcome for everyone. Percy became something between a foreman in training and the person Amelia sent when she needed something done that required both reliability and a face that didn't carry history. He grew into the role without noticing he was growing, which was the best way. Dale remained exactly Dale, steady, practical, constitutionally incapable of saying more than the situation required. She had come to regard him as one of the most valuable people she had ever worked alongside, which she told him once, and he had received it with the mild discomfort of a man who has been complimented and does not know the appropriate response. "Just doing the work," he said. "That's what I mean," she said. He had gone back to his tasks without further discussion, which suited them both. On an evening in late April, after the dinner things were cleared and the men had gone to the bunkhouse and the last of the day's light was sitting red and low over the western range, Wyatt found Amelia in the kitchen garden. She was kneeling in the dirt with her hands deep in it, doing something to the base of the plants that probably had a specific agricultural name she had learned from her father and that Wyatt would not have known to ask about. She did not hear him coming, and she did not look up when he stopped at the garden edge, and for a moment he just stood there. He had been doing that more lately, stopping to look at her in unguarded moments, not with the assessing attention he applied to everything else, but with something quieter and less purposeful. She had caught him at it twice, and both times he had not looked away or pretended he hadn't been looking, which was how she knew it was real. "The North herd count came back," he said. She looked up. "And?" "Good," he said. "Better than last spring. The winter management made a difference." She went back to the plants. "Dale's rotation schedule," she said. "He's the one who adjusted it." "Your suggestion," he said. "My observation," she said. "Dale made it work." He came into the garden and crouched down near where she was working, which she noted because Wyatt Callahan did not generally crouch in gardens. He did it without grace because crouching was not a skill he had ever needed, but he did it and stayed there. "Callaway sent the final letter," he said. "The easement claim is fully dismissed. It can't be refiled." She looked at him. In the last of the evening light, his face had the open quality it sometimes had now. More often than before, not yet quite easy, but real. "It's over," she said. "It's over," he said. She looked at the garden. The plants were small still, the way things were in late April. More potential than evidence, more promise than proof. She had spent a winter building a case for a man's land and the spring planning what would grow in the ground beside his house, and she had not consciously connected those two things until this moment. "I've been thinking," she said, about what this is," she said. "What I want to call it, in my own head." He was quiet and listening, which was what she needed. "I came here with a contract," she said, "and the contract was the beginning of it, and now it's not nothing, the contract, but it's not the main thing anymore, and I want to know what the main thing is." "What do you think it is?" he said. She looked at him directly in the failing light. "I think it's that I live here," she said. "I think it's that this is mine as much as it's yours. Not because of any arrangement, but because I've put myself into it. The kitchen and the ledgers and the north corridor and the south gate at 11 o'clock at night. And you've let me. And you've put yourself into it too, in the ways that you do." She paused. "And I think it's that I would make the same choices again. All of them, including getting on that train." He looked at her for a long moment. "I would have written a different letter," he said, "if I had known." "Would you have written?" "I would have told the truth about what I needed," he said. "Not a practical arrangement, not just a capable woman. I would have said I needed someone I could trust with the real thing, the whole of it, not just the ranch." She absorbed that. It was the most he had ever offered of the inside of himself, and he had offered it simply, the way he did most things, not embellished, not withdrawn, just said. "That's what I would have answered," she said. He reached over and put his hand over hers where it rested on the garden soil, and it was not a dramatic gesture. It was not smooth. His hand was rough from winter work, and the gesture was slightly awkward in the way that genuine gestures sometimes were, and she turned her hand over and held his, and they stayed like that for a while in the late-day Montana light, with the smell of turned earth around them, and the sounds of the ranch settling into evening. She thought about the woman who had gotten on a train in Philadelphia in January with a bag she had packed 3 times because she couldn't decide what to bring to an unknown life. She thought about all the ways that woman had been afraid, of needing, of losing again, of letting herself belong somewhere only to have it taken. She thought about the letter from Voss and the thrown horseshoe and all the small accidents of circumstance that had put her on this patch of ground at this hour with this man. She did not think life owed anyone a particular outcome. She had never believed that, not even when she was young enough to want to. Life was what you were given and what you built from it, and the building was the part that was yours. What she had built here, from a ledger discrepancy and a dead man's forged signature and 3 days in a blizzard and a south gate bolted shut at 11 o'clock at night, was something that had not existed before her. That was the thing about showing up. Not just surviving the arrival, but staying present through all of it. The cold and the hardship and the parts of yourself you had to reckon with, honestly. Until the place you landed started to become the place you were. There was a version of her that had almost believed Voss's letter, that had stood in the Philadelphia room with the agency papers and the anonymous note and thought, maybe this is a sign. Maybe going west was always the wrong idea. Maybe safe and small is what you do now. She was grateful, in a way she could not entirely put into words, to the self that had gotten on the train anyway. The garden would need water in the morning. The herd count was good. The north corridor was clear. The spring was here. She held Wyatt's hand in the dirt and watched the last of the light go. And she did not think about what came next, because what came next was just the life, the ordinary, difficult, irreplaceable life of this place. And she had already decided that was enough, more than enough. It was the thing she had been looking for since before she knew she was looking.